Imagine a world where Morty's the genius and Rick's just trying to keep up. What happens when the smartest person in the universe is a teenager who just wants everyone to be happy? This isn't your typical Rick and Morty adventure. Tonight, we're exploring a reality where everything you know about these characters is flipped upside down. As you drift off to sleep, you'll journey through alternate dimensions where Morty invents the portal gun, and Rick's just along for the ride, making well-intentioned mistakes along the way. In this alternate reality, we're introduced to a Morty who defies everything we've come to expect from the character. Imagine our familiar, stuttering, anxious teenager, but with a mind that rivals or even surpasses the greatest scientific genius in the multiverse. This Morty Smith developed the portal gun at just 14 years old, accomplishing in his early teens what took Rick decades of research and experimentation to achieve in the main timeline. The portal gun sits on Morty's workbench, its design slightly different from the one we're used to seeing. Rather than Rick's cobbled-together utilitarian approach, Morty's version is sleeker, with a holographic interface displaying coordinates and safety parameters. The gun's metal surface is unmarked by scratches or dents, evidence of its careful creation rather than rushed assembly. This isn't a device born of desperate necessity, but rather thoughtful innovation. Walking into Morty's lab, you'd barely recognize it as the same garage where Rick conducts his chaotic experiments in the prime timeline. Every tool has its designated place, hanging on pegboards with outlined shapes. Beakers and test tubes are arranged by size and function, with color-coded labels denoting their contents and hazard levels. Digital screens display ongoing experiments, each one meticulously documented with timestamps and observation notes. The floor is actually visible, not covered in discarded parts, alien residue, or mysterious stains. The most striking difference becomes apparent when you look at the nature of the inventions lining the shelves. Where Rick's lab would typically house weapons, escape mechanisms, and devices primarily designed for his own amusement or survival, Morty's creations serve fundamentally different purposes. A transparent cube pulses with soft blue light. It's an atmospheric purifier capable of removing pollutants from the air of an entire neighborhood. Beside it sits what appears to be a modified first aid kit, but upon closer inspection contains nanobots programmed to accelerate cellular regeneration without scarring. Perhaps most telling is the communication device Morty has been refining. A small earpiece that translates not just languages but emotional intent, helping the wearer understand not just what someone is saying, but what they're truly trying to express. The invention reveals much about its creator, a teenager who still struggles to connect with his peers despite his extraordinary intelligence. Despite his scientific accomplishments, this Morty still carries the emotional hallmarks we recognize. When Jessica walks by while he's taking measurements outside, he drops his quantum calibrator, his face flushing red as he fumbles to pick it up. During lunch in the school cafeteria, he sits alone, scribbling equations on napkins while occasionally glancing longingly at the tables full of laughing teenagers. His intelligence hasn't freed him from adolescent insecurities. In some ways, it has only isolated him further. In class, Morty's hand shoots up to answer questions before the teacher even finishes asking them, earning eye rolls from his classmates. He's learned to force his hand back down sometimes, deliberately getting answers wrong just to seem more normal. The dichotomy creates a poignant portrait, a mind capable of understanding the fundamental workings of the multiverse, yet unable to navigate the simpler mechanics of high school social dynamics. At night, when the Smith household goes quiet, Morty's true work begins. His bedroom transforms into a secondary lab space, with holographic projections filling the air around him. Complex equations float like constellations, rearranging themselves as Morty mutters corrections and refinements. The blue light from his screens reflects off his focused eyes as he types with remarkable speed, occasionally pausing only to rub his tired face or take a sip from a long cold cup of coffee. The walls of his room tell their own story. Where other teenagers might have posters of bands or movies, Morty has detailed maps of various dimensions, carefully annotated with observations and potential variables. A quantum probability chart covers one entire wall, with red pins marking realities he's already explored and green pins indicating promising candidates for future investigation. His bookshelf contains advanced physics texts that would challenge university professors, their pages dog-eared and filled with Morty's cramped notes in the margins. What's most fascinating about this version of Morty isn't just his intelligence, but how he applies it. Unlike Rick, who often works impulsively, jumping directly to full-scale tests of dangerous technology, Morty's approach reflects a careful, methodical mind. Before testing any invention in the real world, he runs extensive computer simulations, considering variables and failure scenarios that Rick would typically dismiss with a belch and a wave of his hand. Where Rick embraces chaos as an inevitability, Morty works diligently to minimize it. This methodical approach extends to his portal gun usage as well. Rather than impulsively jumping between dimensions, Morty maintains a database of coordinates, complete with atmospheric readings, threat assessments, and cultural notes. Each potential destination is thoroughly researched before he even considers visiting. A small notebook beside his bed contains a handwritten checklist he reviews before any interdimensional travel. Safety protocols that Rick would find tediously overcautious. But the most striking revelation comes when we understand what drives this remarkable scientific prodigy. While our familiar Rick was propelled by ego, competitiveness, and a relentless need to prove himself the smartest being in the universe, this Morty's motivation springs from a place of compassion. The central focus of his research isn't self-aggrandizement or even pure scientific discovery. It's finding a way to help his grandfather. In this reality, Rick Sanchez never conquered interdimensional travel. Instead, he's lived a life of unrealized potential, working ordinary jobs that never challenged his intellect or satisfied his curiosity. Now in his later years, this Rick carries a profound sadness, the weight of opportunities never taken and discoveries never made. He puts on a brave face for his family, but Morty, with his keen perception, sees through the facade to the disappointment beneath. Late at night, when his equations blur before his tired eyes, Morty often pauses to look at a framed photograph on his desk. It shows his grandfather at a much younger age, standing proudly next to a science fair project, eyes bright with possibilities that would never materialize in this timeline. The photo serves as both inspiration and reminder of Morty's ultimate goal. The truth becomes clear in a quiet moment when Morty believes he's alone. Having made a breakthrough in his calculations, he picks up the photograph, his finger gently tracing the image of his grandfather's hopeful face. "Don't worry, Grandpa," he whispers to the empty room. "I'm going to find you the perfect reality." The statement reveals the true purpose behind all his remarkable scientific achievements. Not fame, not recognition, but the profound desire to help the person he loves find happiness after a lifetime of disappointment. This genius Morty isn't using the multiverse to escape his problems or seek adventures. He's systematically searching for a reality where his grandfather can finally experience the fulfillment that has eluded him. Each portal he opens, each reality he catalogs, brings him one step closer to finding a place where Rick Sanchez can be truly happy. His intelligence isn't wielded as a weapon or used for self-advancement. It's a tool in service of compassion, a means to heal a wound that has nothing to do with physical injury. Across the infinite multiverse, we've seen countless versions of Rick dragging Morty along on dangerous adventures. But what happens when these roles are completely reversed? In this reality, Rick must confront the hardest challenge any version of him has ever faced: learning to be the sidekick rather than the hero of his own story. This Rick Sanchez never reached the scientific heights achieved by other versions of himself. Instead of developing revolutionary technology or exploring alien worlds, he spent decades bouncing between odd jobs: mechanic at a local garage, night security at a mall, even a brief stint teaching high school science before his lack of credentials was discovered. Each position lasted just long enough for Rick to grow restless, convince himself he was meant for something more, then abandon it for the next opportunity that ultimately led nowhere. We see him in his small apartment, walls decorated not with scientific achievements but with faded concert posters and a single-frame certificate from a community college electronics course. His work uniform hangs on the back of a chair, a simple blue jumpsuit with Rick embroidered on a worn patch. A half-finished model spaceship sits on his coffee table, the kind sold in hobby shops for those who dream of the stars but never reach them. When Morty first showed his grandfather the portal gun, Rick's reaction was nothing like what we'd expect from the genius scientist we know. His hands trembled as he reached out, afraid to touch something so advanced it might as well have been magic. You built this?" he asked, voice cracking with emotion. The mixture of pride and painful inadequacy washing across his face told a story of a man seeing everything he'd ever wanted to be, accomplished by a teenager with his DNA. This Rick doesn't swagger or burp mid-sentence. His posture is slightly hunched, like someone who's spent years trying not to stand out. When excited, he still gestures wildly with his hands, but it's more from genuine enthusiasm than theatrical flair. His gray hair is neatly combed instead of standing on end, and though his eyes still hold that characteristic sharpness, they're softer somehow, more wounded and wondering than cynical. In Morty's lab, Rick tries desperately to be useful. He hands tools to his grandson with the eager expression of someone who wants nothing more than to be included. "Second-phased neutron calibrator," Morty will say, and Rick fumbles through a toolbox, eventually producing what he hopes is the right instrument. Sometimes he's correct, earning a small nod of approval that lights up his entire face. Other times, Morty gently corrects him. "That's actually a quantum stabilizer, Grandpa." And Rick's smile falters just for a moment before he recovers with forced cheerfulness. Rick's notebook has become his most prized possession. It's a weathered composition book with science stuff written on the cover in careful block letters. Inside, the pages are filled with diagrams labeled in his shaky handwriting, attempting to understand the principles behind Morty's inventions. One page shows a crude drawing of the portal gun with arrows pointing to different components, each labeled with guesses. Green stuff equals fuel, and button sequence, top then side, not at same time. Some pages have coffee stains or sauce smudges, evidence of late-night studying while eating takeout, determined to catch up to a level of understanding he may never reach. Rick's attempts to assist in experiments often create minor disasters. During the testing of a gravity modifier, he accidentally reversed the polarity, sending both himself and Morty floating to the ceiling among a constellation of tools and papers. While Morty calmly worked out the solution, Rick flailed in panic until his foot caught in a light fixture. Another time, he mistakenly combined two chemicals that Morty had carefully separated, resulting in a foam that expanded to fill half the garage. Harmless but remarkably persistent, taking 3 days to fully dissolve. Yet for all his scientific shortcomings, this Rick brings something invaluable to their partnership. When Morty becomes frustrated after a failed experiment, spending hours silently recalculating equations, Rick knows exactly when to place a hand on his shoulder and say, "Sometimes the best thing for a stuck brain is a stuck stomach. Pizza break?" He notices when Morty has been working too long without sleep, quietly setting an alarm to remind them both it's time to rest. In one particularly touching moment, we see Rick waiting outside Morty's high school. A group of teenagers walks by, laughing and pointing at Morty as he exits the building alone. Rick steps forward, not confrontationally, but with quiet dignity, putting his arm around his grandson's shoulders. "Their small minds can't begin to comprehend what's in yours," he says, the rehearsed quality of his words suggesting he's practiced this speech many times in front of a mirror, anticipating when Morty might need to hear it. Rick's emotional intelligence extends beyond just supporting his grandson. When dealing with interdimensional beings, he often picks up on social cues that the more technically minded Morty misses. During an encounter with a race of sentient crystals, Morty focused on analyzing their chemical composition, while Rick noticed their color shifting whenever certain topics were mentioned, leading to a crucial diplomatic insight that prevented a potentially disastrous misunderstanding. We watch Rick struggle with his new identity as the sidekick rather than the hero. One evening, after a particularly successful experiment where he contributed nothing, Rick retreats to the garage roof with a beer. Morty finds him there, staring at the stars. "Sometimes I wonder what you need me for," Rick admits, voice small. "You're so much smarter than I'll ever be." Morty sits beside him, shoulders touching. "Intelligence is just one kind of smart, Grandpa," he says. "You know how to talk to people, how to make them feel heard. I never learned that." Gradually, Rick stops trying to understand every scientific principle and starts focusing on what he genuinely can contribute. He becomes the expedition planner, researching the cultural norms of dimensions they plan to visit. He develops a talent for improvisation during crises, coming up with creative, non-technical solutions that complement Morty's analytical approach. When an invention needs testing, he volunteers without hesitation, his trust in Morty's abilities absolute despite the occasional mishap. The workbench in the lab slowly evolves to include a section that is unmistakably Rick's domain, not filled with precision tools or scientific equipment, but with more practical items. First aid supplies, emergency ration packs, a multilingual phrase book, and a small toolkit for basic repairs. His corner isn't high-tech or impressive, but it's essential in its own way. During one adventure, when a hostile local separates them, Morty finds himself struggling without Rick's interpersonal skills. All his genius can't help him navigate the emotional complexities of negotiating safe passage through an alien marketplace. When they finally reunite, Morty admits, "I think I need you as much as you need me." Rick stands a little taller after that day. Perhaps the most significant transformation occurs when Rick stops seeing his role as a stepping stone to something greater and starts recognizing its inherent value. He's not just waiting for his moment to become the genius scientist. He's found purpose in being exactly who he is, the supportive partner who brings humanity and heart to their scientific endeavors. The culmination of Rick's journey from reluctant sidekick to confident partner comes when they prepare for their first major expedition through the portal. As Morty makes final adjustments to the portal gun, Rick stands ready with their supplies, no longer awkward or unsure. Morty hands him the device, trusting him to activate it, a simple act that would have terrified Rick weeks earlier. Rick holds the portal gun with steady hands now, looking at the swirling green doorway it creates with wonder rather than intimidation. "So this little thing can take us anywhere?" he asks, a smile spreading across his face that contains no trace of jealousy, only pride and excitement. "I always knew you were special, Morty." That innocent question, "So this little thing can take us anywhere?" would soon be answered in ways Rick never anticipated, as Morty's portal device held a secretly installed feature designed to measure something far more elusive than interdimensional coordinates. While Rick sees infinite adventures ahead, Morty sees something else entirely. 831 possible chances to fix what's broken in his grandfather's life. As they step through the swirling green doorway for the first time together, Morty's hand trembles slightly, not from fear of the unknown, but from the weight of his secret mission. The garage lab fades behind them as they materialize in a perfect observation point, a hillside overlooking an alternate version of their home. From here, Morty can safely introduce his grandfather to the true purpose of their journey. "Grandpa Rick, there's something I need to show you," Morty says, his voice steady despite his nervousness. He pulls out what looks like a simple tablet device and projects a holographic display between them. "This isn't just about random adventures. I call it the Perfect Reality Project." The display shows a complex web of interconnected worlds, each labeled with alphanumeric designations and color-coded indicators. Rick's eyes widen as he studies the projection. "What am I looking at exactly, Morty?" "Every point of light represents a reality where, according to my calculations, you could potentially be happier than you are in our home dimension." Morty zooms in on a cluster of brightly glowing points. "The brightness indicates probability of happiness based on variables I've been tracking for the past 7 months." Rick steps back, momentarily overwhelmed. "You've been… what? Studying me?" Morty's face flushes as he reaches into his backpack and pulls out a worn leather journal. "I created an algorithm based on observations of your daily patterns, casual conversations, and emotional responses to different stimuli." He flips through pages of handwritten notes, carefully documented observations, and complex equations. "I identified 4 core components of potential happiness for you specifically." Rick takes the journal with shaking hands, seeing page after page of meticulous notes about him, his reactions when he completes a repair job successfully, the slight smile that appears when Beth calls just to check in, the way his shoulders relax when listening to certain music. The level of detail is simultaneously touching and unnerving. "I've never had anyone pay this much attention to me," Rick whispers, his finger tracing a particularly detailed graph tracking his mood variations over a 3-week period. Morty continues, gaining confidence as he explains his methodology. "The 4 core components I've identified are meaningful work that utilizes your mechanical aptitude, genuine family connections without the pressure of being exceptional, freedom from regrets about your scientific potential, and a community that values your practical wisdom rather than just theoretical brilliance." Rick sits down on the hillside, the journal still open in his hands. "I didn't realize I was so transparent." "You're not," Morty assures him. "Most people wouldn't notice these patterns. But I've been watching carefully, and I've created something to help us find the ideal reality." He reaches toward the portal gun and presses a concealed button. The device transforms, extending a small sensor array that wasn't visible before. This scanner measures neurochemical responses, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and several other markers to quantify your happiness in each reality we visit. It's non-invasive, just needs to be within 3 feet of you. Morty demonstrates how the readings appear on his tablet. "See these baseline readings? That's you right now. We'll compare them as we explore different realities." Rick stands up, visibly uncomfortable with being the center of such intense scientific scrutiny. "You did all this for me? Why?" Morty turns away, suddenly self-conscious. "Because you deserve to be happy, Grandpa. Everyone does. And with infinite realities available to us, there has to be one where everything aligns perfectly for you." Later that evening, they return to Morty's bedroom to review the data from their first observation. The room has been transformed from what one might expect of a teenage boy's space. One entire wall is covered with a hand-drawn map of the multiverse, sections marked with different colored pins and sticky notes. Several realities are circled in red marker, with annotations like "atmospheric toxicity too high" or "Rick's counterpart imprisoned for fraud." Rick examines the wall, picking up a small notebook tucked beneath the desk. Inside, he finds detailed profiles of various alternate Ricks, their occupations, family relationships, apparent mental health status. Some entries are accompanied by candid photographs taken through portals, showing these alternate versions going about their lives, completely unaware they're being observed. "This is extensive," Rick says, unsure whether to feel violated on behalf of his alternate selves or impressed by Morty's thoroughness. "I've been conducting preliminary surveys for months," Morty explains, updating his database with today's observations. "I've already eliminated 215 realities that initially seemed promising but had fatal flaws. Like this one." He points to a yellow-tagged reality. "You were a successful inventor with a loving family, but severe solar flares cause debilitating migraines for anyone over 50. Rick notices several sticky notes with question marks next to dimensions marked as high potential. "What are these question marks for?" "Those are realities where the scans indicated your counterpart was displaying signs of happiness. But something seemed off," Morty explains. "Like reality J46, where you appeared content running a repair shop, but my sleep monitoring equipment detected your counterpart wasn't sleeping more than 3 hours a night. Surface happiness doesn't always tell the whole story." As Rick continues examining Morty's research, he discovers a small photo album labeled Potential Happiness Indicators. Inside are photos Morty has secretly taken of Rick in rare moments of genuine joy, fixing the neighbor's classic car, teaching Summer how to change a tire, solving a particularly challenging crossword puzzle. Each photo is annotated with observations about environmental factors, social context, and visible emotional markers. "According to my calculations," Morty says, pointing to a summary page on his tablet, "there are at least 831 realities where you could be significantly happier than you are now. We just need to find the right one." Rick sits heavily on Morty's bed, overwhelmed by the scope of his grandson's project and the depth of care it represents. "I don't know what to say, Morty. No one's ever..." He trails off, unable to finish. Morty mistakes Rick's silence for disappointment. "I know the science isn't perfect yet. There are too many variables to predict with absolute certainty which reality will be ideal. That's why we need to visit them personally, to verify the algorithm's predictions and… Morty, Rick interrupts gently, I'm not criticizing your science. I'm just not used to being cared about like this, to being someone's project. Morty looks down at his hands. Is it too much? Should we stop? Rick is quiet for a long moment, looking around at the months of work surrounding him, all focused on his happiness. Finally, he shakes his head. It's just gonna take some getting used to, being the sidekick in my own rescue mission. While Rick processes his new role as the subject rather than the scientist, Morty's tablet pings with an alert notification. Reality H7 has just jumped to the top of the compatibility rankings. The screen displays a pulsing green dot labeled Harmony Reality with promising happiness metrics. Morty taps the notification excitedly, bringing up a detailed profile of this dimension. This one looks perfect, Grandpa Rick, Morty says, adjusting some settings on his portal device. Reality H7 evolved without humanity developing aggressive tendencies. Their societies have no conflict, no wars, not even arguments. My preliminary scans suggest people are 78% happier than in our reality. Rick raises an eyebrow, unconvinced. No arguments at all? That sounds weird. What do they do when they disagree about something? That's the fascinating part, Morty explains, punching in coordinates. They've developed complex consensus-building communication systems. They don't move forward with any decision until everyone feels heard and valued. Their entire evolutionary path diverged from ours around 50,000 years ago. The portal gun whirs to life, projecting a swirling green doorway that bathes the garage in emerald light. Morty checks the scanner one last time, ensuring it's calibrated to monitor Rick's neurochemical responses, then gestures toward the portal. After you, Morty says with a hint of pride. Just remember, the scanner needs close proximity to get accurate readings. Rick takes a deep breath, adjusts his collar nervously, and steps through. Morty follows close behind. They emerge into a sunlit meadow where the Smith family home would normally stand. Instead, a sprawling circular structure extends outward, with living spaces arranged like petals around a central community area. The architecture uses natural materials that blend seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. Living walls covered in flowering plants, solar panels designed to resemble large leaves, and water collection systems that double as artistic fountains. Wow, Rick whispers, his eyes wide. It's like if architecture took a deep breath and relaxed. A group of people notice their arrival and approach with welcoming smiles. Morty recognizes alternate versions of his family, though they're dressed in flowing clothes made from natural fibers and soft earth tones. What's most striking is their body language, completely open, without the tension that normally characterizes the Smith family interactions. "Welcome, travelers," says this reality's Beth, her voice melodic and unhurried. "We sensed a dimensional shift. Please join our dwelling circle and share your journey's purpose." Rick seems momentarily stunned by being greeted so warmly. Morty watches his grandfather's face carefully while glancing at the scanner readings on his tablet. Already, Rick's serotonin levels are climbing steadily. "We're just visiting," Morty explains, "exploring different realities to learn from them." "A wonderful purpose," nods Harmony Jerry, who lacks completely the nervous energy of their Jerry. "We would be honored to share our living practices with you. The community meal gathering begins soon." They're led to the central community space, a circular open-air pavilion where about 50 people are arranging cushions around low tables. Rick notices there's no hierarchy. Everyone participates in setting up, from the eldest members to small children who carefully place flowers in the center of each table. "So, everyone lives together?" Rick asks. "Like, all the families?" "We find that sharing resources and responsibilities creates more joy for everyone," explains Harmony Summer, who lacks the cynicism of their Summer. "Each dwelling petal houses what you might call a family unit, but the barriers between them are permeable. Children are raised by the community, not just by their biological relatives." During the meal, Rick observes how decisions are made. When the question of where to hold tomorrow's music gathering arises, Every single person speaks, offering their perspective. No one interrupts. No voice rises above others. The process takes nearly an hour, but eventually, they reach a solution that genuinely satisfies everyone. Morty's scanner shows Rick's happiness levels continuing to rise. "Are you enjoying this?" he whispers to his grandfather. "It's peaceful," Rick admits, looking genuinely relaxed for the first time since Morty can remember. No one's trying to one-up each other. No one's dismissed for having a stupid idea. They actually listen. They spend the day experiencing this harmonious community. Rick joins a group working in the community garden, taking instruction from others without his usual defensive reactions. When Rick shares an idea about improving their irrigation system, the group listens attentively, considers his suggestion, and incorporates parts of it after reaching consensus. Rick's happiness readings spike even higher. "My scanner shows you're happier than I've ever recorded," Morty tells Rick privately as the day progresses. "I think we might have found your perfect reality on our first try." Rick nods slowly. "It's nice not feeling like I have to defend myself all the time. These people don't have any agenda except being happy together." As evening approaches, dark clouds gather unexpectedly on the horizon. The wind picks up, bending the trees surrounding the community dwelling. Harmony Beth calls everyone to the central pavilion. "Friends, our weather sensing devices indicate an unusually powerful storm approaches," she announces calmly. "We should discuss how to prepare." What follows is exactly what Rick and Morty have observed all day: a methodical discussion where everyone speaks. But as the wind grows stronger and the first heavy raindrops begin to fall, the discussion continues without urgency. Children look increasingly frightened as thunder booms closer, but the adults maintain their measured tone, still working through every possible option. "Shouldn't you be, I don't know, boarding up windows or something?" Rick finally interrupts, looking concerned as a branch crashes nearby. "We're still reaching consensus on the best approach," Harmony Jerry explains patiently. "Some believe we should move to the underground shelter. Others think reinforcing the dwelling is sufficient, while others suggest..." A massive crack of thunder cuts him off as part of a nearby tree splits and crashes dangerously close to the structure. Children cry out in fear. Rick's face changes subtly as he looks from the storm to the still calmly discussing adults. He stands up, his posture straightening. "Okay, listen up," he says, his voice commanding but not harsh. "I respect your process, but that storm is moving too fast for complete consensus. We need to act now to keep everyone safe." The community members look at him with surprise but not hostility. "I suggest we split into teams," Rick continues, naturally taking charge. One group moves the children and elderly to the underground shelter. Another secures loose objects that could become projectiles. A third reinforces the vulnerable parts of the dwelling structure. "We can discuss the perfect solution after everyone's safe." After a brief moment of silence, Harmony Beth nods. Our visitor offers wisdom. Perhaps in emergency situations, a temporary leadership structure has advantages. To Morty's surprise, the community quickly organizes according to Rick's suggestion. Rick directs different groups, his experience from countless crisis situations evident in his calm efficiency. When one of the dwelling's solar panels threatens to tear loose in the wind, Rick personally climbs up and secures it, despite the danger. Morty checks his scanner and notices something interesting. Rick's happiness readings remain high, but now show elevated dopamine levels associated with purpose and accomplishment, rather than just the serotonin of contentment. By the time the storm passes, everyone is safe, damage is minimal, and the community has experienced something new: decisive action in a crisis. They gather once more in the central pavilion, now lit by emergency lights. "We wish to express gratitude," Harmony Beth tells Rick, "for showing us that different situations may require different decision processes." Rick shrugs modestly. "You guys have built something amazing here, but sometimes you need to move quickly, even if the solution isn't perfect." Later, as Morty readies the portal device for their departure, he reviews the scanner data. "Your happiness readings were off the charts today. This could be your perfect reality?" Rick looks around at the peaceful community rebuilding together after the storm. He seems thoughtful rather than eager. "It's amazing here," he admits as the portal swirls open. "But I felt strange during that storm. Like they needed something I could give them, but their whole system wouldn't let them ask for it." Rick's words hang in the air as they return to the garage, revealing something neither of them expected from this experiment. Maybe happiness isn't just about peaceful coexistence, but about purpose and contribution. Morty's scanner suddenly beeps with a new alert, showing a reality where one version of Rick seems to have found both adoration and achievement on a scale that's literally changed his world. Reality. A15, Morty reads aloud, adjusting his glasses as he studies the readings. "Grandpa, this is incredible. According to my calculations, this Rick has happiness metrics that are off the charts, at least when he's in public settings." He turns the screen toward Rick, who leans in with genuine curiosity. "This version of you invented something called harmonic fusion. It's basically eliminated the need for fossil fuels and reversed climate change across their entire planet." Rick's eyes widen slightly as he processes this information. "So, what? I'm some kind of environmental savior? That doesn't sound like me at all." But there's a hint of interest in his voice that tells Morty he's intrigued by the possibility. "Worth checking out?" Morty asks, already punching in the coordinates. The familiar green swirl opens before them, and they step through into a world that looks remarkably similar to their own, except for one striking difference that becomes apparent immediately. As they emerge onto a busy city street, they're confronted by an enormous bronze statue dominating the central square. It depicts Rick Sanchez, standing tall with arms outstretched, holding what appears to be a glowing orb. The plaque beneath it reads simply, "Rick Sanchez, Savior of Earth." "Okay, that's weird," Rick murmurs, pulling his cap lower over his eyes as a group of pedestrians walks past, several of them wearing t-shirts with his face printed on them. Before they can process this further, a limousine pulls up beside them, and the window rolls down to reveal a face they recognize. This reality's version of Rick. He looks remarkably similar to their Rick, except his hair is neatly styled, his clothes are clearly expensive, and he wears a confident smile that borders on smugness. "Well, well," Achievement Rick says, gesturing for them to get in. "Dimensional travelers, huh? Been expecting someone like you to show up eventually. Hop in before someone recognizes you and creates a paradox situation." As they slide into the luxury vehicle, Morty discreetly checks his scanner, noting the steady high readings coming from Achievement Rick. The interior of the limousine is filled with awards and framed newspaper clippings, all celebrating various accomplishments. "So you're the Rick who saved the world," their Rick says, trying to keep his tone neutral despite his obvious fascination. "Achievement." Rick laughs, pouring himself a drink from a crystal decanter. "Saved it. I transformed it. Harmonic fusion wasn't just an energy solution. It created whole new industries, revolutionized transportation, even changed how people think about science itself." He gestures out the window as they drive past a massive research facility bearing his name. "The Rick Sanchez Institute for Sustainable Innovation. We've got over 3,000 scientists working on the next big breakthrough." Morty notices his grandfather's expression, a mixture of awe and something else he can't quite identify. The limousine turns down a private road leading to an enormous mansion perched on a hillside overlooking the city. "Home sweet home," Achievement Rick announces as they pull up to the entrance. "Well, one of them. I've got 7 across the globe. Can't be everywhere at once, though sometimes it feels like I need to be." As they enter the mansion, they're greeted by staff members who efficiently take Achievement Rick's coat and offer refreshments. Morty continues monitoring his scanner, noting with interest how the happiness readings remain consistently high as Achievement Rick shows them through rooms filled with trophies, medals, and photographs of him with world leaders. "Is your family here?" Morty asks, looking around for any sign of Beth or the others. A brief shadow crosses Achievement Rick's face. "Beth and Jerry live downtown. Summer's at college on the East Coast. And my Morty?" He pauses, his smile faltering slightly. "He's around somewhere, probably in his room." As if on cue, a teenage boy, who bears a striking resemblance to Morty, walks down the grand staircase, barely glancing up from his phone. This reality's Morty is dressed in expensive clothes, his hair perfectly styled, but his expression is distant and bored. Morty, Achievement Rick calls out. We have visitors, dimensional travelers. Achievement. Morty finally looks up, showing a flicker of interest before shrugging. Cool, I've got study group in 20 minutes. He continues past them without another word, heading toward the door. He's very focused on his education, Achievement Rick explains, but Morty doesn't miss the way his scanner readings suddenly dip. Top of his class. Following in my footsteps, of course. Our Rick watches the interaction with a puzzled expression. You two don't adventure together? Achievement. Rick waves dismissively. No time for that stuff anymore. I've got a global empire to run, foundations to manage, speeches to give. Besides, interdimensional travel is old news for me. Been there, done that, got the merchandising deals. He laughs, but it doesn't quite reach his eyes. As the day progresses, they're invited to attend a gala celebration where Achievement Rick is being honored with yet another award. The ballroom is filled with celebrities, politicians, and business leaders, all vying for a moment of Achievement Rick's time. Morty keeps his scanner running, noting how the happiness metrics spike whenever Achievement Rick is giving speeches or accepting applause. During a quiet moment when Achievement Rick is surrounded by admirers, our Rick slips away to explore the mansion. He finds himself in a study filled with more awards and framed magazine covers, all featuring the same confident smile. But on a small desk in the corner, partially hidden behind larger frames, he discovers a simple photograph of Achievement Rick with Beth Summer and Morty from what appears to be years ago. They're at a beach, laughing together, looking like a normal family. Later that evening, after the guests have departed, our Rick finds Achievement Rick alone on the terrace, staring out at the city lights with a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. Quite a life you've built here, Rick says, joining him at the railing. Achievement. Rick nods slowly. Everything I ever thought I wanted. He takes a sip of his drink, then adds quietly, You know, I haven't had an actual conversation with my Morty in over 2 years. Not a real one anyway. Just schedules, appearances, educational requirements. Morty, who has been discreetly monitoring from nearby, watches his scanner as Achievement Rick's happiness levels plummet to their lowest reading of the day. The funny thing is, Achievement Rick continues, not noticing Morty's presence. I thought saving the world would fix everything. Make Beth proud, give Jerry something to respect, show Summer and Morty what greatness looks like. He laughs bitterly. Instead, I've got a daughter who visits twice a year for official functions, a son-in-law who's terrified of saying the wrong thing around me, a granddaughter who's changed her last name to avoid the attention, and a grandson who… He trails off, staring into his glass. Who what? Our Rick prompts gently. Who looks at me exactly the way I used to look at my own father? Like I'm a stranger he happens to be related to? The following morning, as they prepare to depart, Morty notices something interesting on his scanner. Their Rick's happiness levels, which had initially spiked when they arrived in this reality of fame and recognition, have been steadily declining. Not impressed by all this? Morty asks, as they wait for the portal to stabilize. Rick looks around at the mansion, the awards, the distant view of his statue in the city center. It's impressive, he admits. But I think I prefer our garage lab. At least there, when you ramble about quantum physics, you're actually talking to me, not at me. As Achievement Rick approaches to bid them farewell, he pulls our Rick aside for a final private word. You know what's ironic? I've got buildings named after me, my face on actual currency, and a national holiday in my honor. But I'd trade it all for what you have. What's that? Rick asks, genuinely confused. Achievement. Rick nods toward Morty, who's making final adjustments to the portal gun. A real relationship with him. Don't lose that. Trust me, no amount of statues make up for it. Achievement. Rick's words linger as they step through the portal, but what about a Rick who never left in the first place? What if the greatest scientific mind in the universe chose family photo albums over the multiverse, bedtime stories over interdimensional adventures, and stability over chaos? The portal gun whirs as it locks onto coordinates for reality F42, and Morty's scanner begins to display a consistent, steady reading, unlike the dramatic spikes they witnessed with Achievement Rick. The Smith family home materializes around them as they step through the portal, but it's almost unrecognizable compared to the one they know. Instead of sparse decorations and minimal personal touches, this house feels lived in, truly lived in. The walls are practically a timeline of family history, covered with framed photographs documenting decades of shared experiences. There's a coherent aesthetic to the decorating that suggests someone actually cared about creating a home rather than just a place to sleep. "Whoa!" Rick whispers, approaching a wall of family photos. His fingers hover over images of himself holding a young Beth on his shoulders at a carnival, teaching her to ride a bike, and sitting proudly at her high school graduation. I wasn't there for any of this." His voice wavers with an emotion Morty rarely hears from his grandfather. Regret. Morty checks his scanner, keeping his voice low. This Rick's happiness levels are interesting. They're not off the charts like achievement Ricks were in public, but they're steady. No dramatic highs, but also no severe lows. Just consistent contentment. A sound from the kitchen draws their attention. Family. First, Rick is preparing dinner, humming softly to himself as he chops vegetables with skilled precision. The kitchen is spotless but clearly well used, with personalized cooking tools and a refrigerator covered in children's drawings, shopping lists, and family schedules. "Honey, can you check if we need more tomato sauce?" A woman's voice calls from another room. Beth's voice, but with a warmth and ease they're not accustomed to hearing. "Already on it, sweetie," Family First Rick responds, opening a perfectly organized pantry. "We've got plenty. I restocked yesterday during my grocery run." Our Rick and Morty exchange glances of astonishment. The domesticity is almost shocking compared to their reality. This Rick moves around the kitchen with the same dexterity their Rick shows in a lab, but his domain is family meals rather than scientific breakthroughs. They silently move toward what would be Rick's garage in their reality. Here, it's been converted into a modest workshop, but nothing like the interdimensional laboratory they know. The space contains neatly arranged tools, a workbench with several small gadgets, and household items in various states of repair or enhancement. "Look at these," Morty says, examining the inventions. "They're clever, but so practical." He picks up what appears to be a modified toaster. This converts bread directly into perfectly toasted slices without using heat. Probably uses some kind of molecular reconfiguration. "And this?" He points to another device. "I think it's a weather predictor that's more accurate than any meteorological system. But they're all for everyday convenience." Rick nods slowly, studying a wall of shelves filled with similar inventions. His genius is still there, but it's channeled differently. No interdimensional travel, no weapons, no world-altering technology, just quality of life improvements for his family. They hear footsteps approaching and quickly hide behind a large tool cabinet. Family. First, Rick enters, closing the door softly behind him. He sits at his workbench and pulls out a sketchbook from a hidden drawer. As he flips through the pages, they glimpse designs far more ambitious than the household gadgets: spacecraft concepts, theoretical physics equations, and what looks like early concepts for interdimensional travel. For a moment, a different expression crosses family. First, Rick's face. A longing, a questioning of what might have been. He stares out the workshop's small window at the night sky, stars twinkling in the distance. His fingers trace a particularly complex diagram before he sighs deeply and returns the sketchbook to its hidden place. "Dad, dinner in 5 minutes," Beth's voice calls through the door. The wistful expression vanishes instantly, replaced by a genuine smile. "Coming right up." "Family." First, Rick responds, his tone light and cheerful. As he leaves the workshop, he pauses to straighten a family photo on the wall, one showing 3 generations of Smiths at a lakeside cabin, all smiling broadly at the camera. Later that evening, our Rick and Morty observe the family gathered around the dinner table. The conversation flows naturally with laughter and easy banter. Family First Rick tells jokes, listens attentively to Summer's school stories, helps Jerry understand a complex work problem, and gently asks Morty about his science project. There's no mockery, no barely concealed contempt, no caustic remarks, just genuine family interaction. His scanner readings are holding steady, Morty whispers, checking his device. Consistent serotonin and oxytocin levels, moderate but stable dopamine. It's like emotional stability incarnate. After dinner, while the family watches a movie together in the living room, our duo slips outside to discuss what they've observed. The night air is cool and clear, and through the window they can see Family First Rick with his arm around Beth, the entire family laughing at something on screen. He seems happy, Morty says, studying the scanner readings again. Not the intense happiness of achievement Rick in public, but something more sustainable. Rick nods slowly, his expression complicated. Yeah, but did you see his face in the workshop when he was looking at those sketches, at the stars? He pauses, collecting his thoughts. He gave up something too, Morty. His mind still comes up with those big ideas, those world-changing concepts. He just never pursues them. The next morning, they witness Family First Rick tending to a garden in the backyard. The plants are arranged with scientific precision. Optimal spacing, companion planting, and an irrigation system that's clearly his own design. It's science applied to the everyday, genius in service to the simple. Beth brings him lemonade, and they sit together on a garden bench talking quietly. The intimacy between father and daughter is palpable. Decades of built trust and shared experiences creating a bond that our Rick can barely comprehend. I've never seen Beth like that, Rick whispers. So, secure. No abandonment issues, no seeking validation. She knows her father loves her and always will. Before they leave, they witness one more telling moment. Family. First, Rick retreats to his workshop after lunch and pulls out his sketchbook again. This time, he starts a new design, something that looks like an educational toy that teaches complex physics through play. He glances at his more ambitious sketches, smiles sadly, then deliberately turns the page and focuses on his new project. It's a choice he seems to have made countless times before. Family over scientific ambition, present happiness over potential discovery. As our Rick and Morty prepare to leave reality F42, Rick stands silent for a long moment, watching through the window as Family First Rick helps his Morty with homework at the kitchen table. You know, Rick finally says, voice quiet, I always thought it was binary. Either be the greatest scientist in the universe or be a boring family man. But watching him, I realize he's still brilliant, still creating. Just within different boundaries. He chose different limitations. Morty nods, studying his scanner one last time. His happiness is real, not ecstatic, but consistent. No crashes, no destructive behaviors. But he gave up the stars, Morty, Rick says, looking upward at the afternoon sky. He looks at them every night, wondering. That part of him, the explorer, the pioneer, it's still there, just unfulfilled. So what's the verdict? Morty asks, finger hovering over the portal gun button. Is this the perfect reality for you? Rick is quiet for a long moment, watching as Family First Rick laughs at something his Morty says. The two of them engaged in what appears to be a complex science problem. I think, Rick says slowly, that I needed both, the family and the stars. Maybe happiness isn't about choosing one good thing, but finding the right balance. The notion of balance lingers between them as the portal gun suddenly locks onto coordinates for reality R22, pulling them through the swirling green vortex. As they step through, both Rick and Morty find themselves standing in what appears to be the Smith family living room. Yet something feels immediately different. The furniture arrangement has changed. Family photos show unfamiliar configurations, and there's an undeniable sense that the household hierarchy they've known has been completely rearranged. Grandpa, we have visitors, calls a voice from the kitchen. Summer emerges, but not the phone-obsessed teenager they're familiar with. This Summer carries herself differently, clipboard in hand, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing a button-up shirt with rolled sleeves. She studies them for exactly 3 seconds before stating matter-of-factly, "You're dimensional travelers. Our Rick and Morty are at the Science Symposium today. I'm guessing you're from Reality Cluster C, based on your clothing patterns and the specific calibration of your portal device." Rick and Morty exchange startled glances. How did you... Morty begins, clutching his scanner. I maintain the family's interdimensional visitor log, Summer explains, already jotting notes. We get about 3 variant family members annually. Last month it was a version of my mom who became president. The month before, a version of me who never removed her braces. These things happen when your family has access to portal technology. She gestures toward the couch. Please, make yourselves comfortable while I inform the others. As they sit, Rick whispers, Is it just me, or is she acting exactly like Beth from our reality? Morty finishes, adjusting settings on his scanner. The organizational skills, the immediate assessment, even the way she carries herself, it's all classic Beth. Their conversation is interrupted by the sound of clattering from another room, followed by a burst of carefree laughter. Beth herself appears, but unlike the composed, somewhat rigid surgeon they know, this Beth is splattered with multiple colors of paint and clay. Her hair is wild and partially dyed blue, and she wears a flowing artist's smock covered in a rainbow of stains. Visitors from another dimension, how cosmically inspirational. She twirls into the room, setting down a bizarre sculpture that appears to be made of twisted metal and glowing crystals. I'm in the middle of my new series, Familial Fractals Across Infinite Planes. You simply must tell me about your reality's artistic movements. Before they can respond, the front door opens and Jerry strides in. But this isn't the insecure, unemployed Jerry they know. This Jerry wears a tailored business suit, wireless earpiece blinking as he concludes what sounds like a high-stakes business call. We'll finalize the merger tomorrow. Have the paperwork on my desk by 8. He ends the call, straightens his tie, and notices Rick and Morty. Ah, interdimensional visitors. Summer, have you updated the log? Beth, did you offer them refreshments? Where's my father-in-law when we need his scientific expertise? Despite his commanding presence, there's still a flicker of that familiar Jerry need for validation as he glances toward Rick. Jerry runs Smith Tech Solutions, Summer explains, handing him the visitor log. The company specializes in simplified user interfaces for complex technologies. It's currently valued at just over $8 billion. Jerry beams with pride, but his eyes drift to Rick, clearly seeking approval. We're making technology accessible to everyone, not just geniuses. I always say, if my father-in-law Rick can understand it, anyone can. Morty checks his scanner discreetly, monitoring the neurochemical readings of this reality's inhabitants. Their happiness metrics are surprisingly balanced, he whispers to Rick. No extreme highs or lows, just steady contentment across the board. Summer ushers them on a tour of the house, which reveals more fascinating differences. In this reality, Summer's room contains organizational charts for family activities, color-coded calendars, and a desk with neatly arranged household budgets. Someone has to keep this family functioning, she explains. Mom's too busy with her artistic inspiration, Dad's handling his corporate empire, and Grandpa and Morty are always tinkering with science experiments. Beth's art studio, formerly the garage, explodes with creativity. Sculptures that defy gravity, paintings that seem to shift when viewed from different angles, and installations incorporating salvaged alien technology. My work explores the interconnectedness of family dynamics across infinite realities, Beth explains, gesturing to a particularly striking piece. This one just sold to the National Gallery for 6 figures. In our reality, Beth's a horse surgeon, Rick mentions cautiously. A surgeon? Beth laughs. How dreadfully constrained. One path, one outcome. Where's the creative expression in that? Here, I can explore infinite possibilities, just like Morty and my father explore infinite worlds. Jerry's home office reveals a successful business built on simplifying complex technologies. I realize not everyone could be a genius like Rick, but everyone deserves to benefit from genius innovations, he explains, demonstrating a simplified version of a complex quantum device. We make Rick-level technology accessible to Jerry-level users. Despite his success, Jerry still glances at Rick occasionally, seeking validation. Some personality traits remain consistent across realities. When the alternate realities Rick and Morty return home, the differences become even more apparent. This Rick is confident but not arrogant, brilliant but not dismissive of others. He serves as the household's moral compass and emotional foundation, the person everyone turns to for advice and support. We're exploring the quantum crystallization of emotional states. This reality's Morty explains, showing off equations that make even genius Morty from our reality raise his eyebrows in respect. Grandpa Rick provides the theoretical framework, and I handle the practical applications. Over dinner, they observe the family interactions with fascination. Summer efficiently manages the meal. Beth enthusiastically shares her latest artistic inspiration. Jerry discusses business strategies while seeking Rick's input, and the alternate Rick and Morty collaborate on scientific theories between bites. What's most interesting, Morty whispers to his Rick, is that despite completely different roles, they've found a balance that works. My scanner shows consistent happiness levels across the entire family. Later, as the alternate family retires to their respective activities, Rick and Morty have a moment alone on the back porch. Notice how they still gravitate toward their core talents? Rick observes. Summer's always been perceptive and assertive. Here, she just channels it differently. Beth's surgical precision translates to artistic detail. Even Jerry's desperate need for approval remains, just wrapped in success instead of failure. Morty nods, studying his scanner readings. What's remarkable is how they complement each other. Summer provides structure, Beth brings creativity, Jerry contributes practical application, and the other Rick and Morty supplies scientific innovation. Each person's strength supports another's weakness. It's like they're puzzle pieces, Rick muses. The shapes are the same as in our reality, but they've been rearranged to fit together differently. As they prepare to depart the next morning, the family gathers to bid them farewell. Summer has prepared a detailed information packet about their reality for Morty's records. Beth presents them with a small sculpture she created overnight, a twisting spiral that somehow captures the essence of interdimensional travel. Jerry offers business cards, just in case you need a consultant in your reality. The alternate Rick and Morty share scientific notes with their counterparts. Standing before the swirling portal, Rick turns to Morty. You know what I've realized? In every reality we've visited, the individuals remain fundamentally themselves. It's how they interact that creates happiness or unhappiness. So it's not about changing who we are, Morty replies thoughtfully, but finding the right configuration where everyone's strengths can shine. The concept of finding the right configuration still hanging in the air, Morty reaches for the portal gun. I've been tracking a reality where we're still explorers, but without leaving a trail of interdimensional incidents behind us. He inputs coordinates with practiced precision, the green glow illuminating his concentrated expression. Reality P88. I've been saving this one for when you needed perspective rather than excitement. As they step through the swirling portal, the familiar disorientation gives way to a breathtaking sight. They emerge onto a floating observation platform overlooking a vibrant alien cityscape, unlike anything they've seen before. Crystalline spires reach toward 3 moons hanging low in a lavender sky, while creatures with iridescent wings navigate between them in graceful formations. Whoa, Rick whispers, genuinely awestruck. Where are we exactly? The Lumerian Collective, Morty explains, consulting his scanner. A civilization that evolved without a concept of currency or ownership. Their entire society functions on knowledge exchange. He points to a structure in the distance that resembles a massive library. And that's where we'll find them. Find who? Rick asks, already knowing the answer. Us, Morty says with a small smile. They make their way through the city, drawing curious but not hostile glances from the locals, tall, willowy beings with skin that shifts color with their emotions. Unlike most realities they've visited, no one runs screaming at the sight of a Rick and Morty walking their streets. If anything, some of the Lumerians seem to recognize them, offering respectful nods as they pass. Inside the enormous library, they find what they're looking for. Another Rick and Morty sit at a circular table with several Lumerians, deep in discussion over holographic star charts and data projections. This Rick wears a fitted uniform with patches from various planetary expeditions, his hair neatly tied back. The alternate Morty sports similar attire, but with additional equipment, camera drones hovering nearby, and a translator device more advanced than anything our Morty has created. They hang back, observing the interaction from behind a towering bookshelf. The peaceful Rick speaks with authority but without arrogance, pointing to a sector of space where resource distribution has caused tension between neighboring species. If we facilitate a knowledge exchange between the Xylons and Vexra, peaceful Rick explains, both civilizations gain what they need without conflict. The Xylons' atmospheric purification techniques solve the Vexra pollution crisis, while the Vexra's agricultural innovations address Xylon food shortages. Our Rick watches with fascination as his counterpart sketches a diplomatic framework that seems obvious in hindsight yet revolutionary in application. He's actually solving problems instead of creating them, he whispers to Morty, and without weapons or threats. Morty checks his scanner, noting the steady high readings. Their dopamine and serotonin levels are consistently elevated, not the manic spikes we saw with Achievement Rick, but sustainable fulfillment. They follow their counterparts as the meeting concludes, trailing them to a modest spacecraft docked at the city's edge. Unlike Rick's typical cobbled-together vehicles, this ship has been thoughtfully designed with dedicated research stations and living quarters that prioritize comfort during long journeys. Inside, our Rick and Morty are amazed by the walls lined with specimen containers housing not weapons or dangerous substances, but carefully preserved plant samples, cultural artifacts, and data crystals. A holographic map dominates the central chamber, showing hundreds of worlds with annotation tags floating beside each one. Is that their entire exploration history? Rick asks, examining the map. Morty nods. According to my preliminary research, they've visited over 500 planets in just 3 years, and not a single one has declared them enemies of the state. The peaceful counterparts enter their ship, unaware they're being observed thanks to Morty's cloaking technology. Peaceful Rick retrieves a leather-bound journal from his workstation and begins making detailed notes by hand, while his Morty uploads the day's video footage to an organized database. They document everything, Morty whispers. Not just scientific discoveries, but cultural observations, ethical dilemmas they've encountered, even personal reflections on how different worlds have changed their perspectives. Our Rick finds himself drawn to a shelf containing dozens of similar journals, each labeled with coordinates and dates. He carefully pulls one down and flips through pages filled with meticulous observations, sketches of alien flora, and thoughtful analyses of societal structures. These are incredible, Rick admits, genuine admiration in his voice. It's like they're creating the definitive guide to the multiverse, but without blowing anything up in the process. They watch as peaceful Rick and Morty prepare for their next destination, working in perfect synchronization, each anticipating the other's needs without speaking. Their movements have the easy rhythm of a team that has developed complete trust. They actually like each other, Rick observes. Not just tolerate, they genuinely enjoy working together. Their observation is interrupted when an alarm sounds throughout the ship. Peaceful Rick quickly activates a communication channel, revealing a frantic Lumerian reporting that seismic activity threatens one of their underground library vaults containing irreplaceable knowledge crystals. What happens next reveals the limitations of the peaceful approach. The counterparts immediately prepare to assist, but their emergency response seems focused entirely on documentation and preservation, recording the event and saving artifacts, rather than addressing the actual danger. They're going to document the disaster instead of preventing it, Rick says incredulously. Morty checks his scanner. Their stress levels are elevated, but they're still following standard protocols. I don't think they know how to improvise in a crisis. As the situation deteriorates, Rick can no longer remain a passive observer. He deactivates their cloaking device, startling their peaceful counterparts. What the? Peaceful Rick begins. No time to explain, our Rick interrupts. Your seismic stabilizers won't deploy fast enough if you keep following that checklist. You need to reverse the polarity and create a containment field before reinforcing the structural supports. The peaceful counterparts exchange surprised glances but quickly recognize the logic in Rick's suggestion. Together, all four work to implement the modified plan. Our Rick and Morty contributing their crisis management experience while the peaceful duo provides their extensive knowledge of Lumerian architecture and technology. The combination proves effective. They manage to stabilize the library vault just before catastrophic collapse, saving both the knowledge crystals and the Lumerians who had been trapped inside. In the aftermath, both sets of Rick and Morty's share a moment of mutual respect. Peaceful Rick examines our Rick's improvisations with professional interest. "You adapted our equipment in ways we never considered," he acknowledges. "Where did you learn to think like that?" "When every other adventure ends with someone trying to kill you, you get good at emergency workarounds," Rick replies with a shrug. The peaceful Morty reviews footage from the rescue. "Your intervention saved 17 lives and approximately 3 million years of accumulated knowledge." "Just another Tuesday for us," our Morty says with a small smile. Before departing, the peaceful counterparts gift our Rick and Morty with their own documentation journal and recording equipment. "Perhaps you could start cataloging your adventures too," peaceful Rick suggests. "The multiverse could benefit from your unique perspective." As they prepare to return home, Rick examines the empty journal thoughtfully. Morty notices his contemplative expression. "What are you thinking?" he asks. "I'm thinking I like what they're doing here," Rick admits. "The whole peaceful explorer thing has its appeal. But I also noticed something important today." "What's that?" Rick takes the journal from Morty, flipping through the entries they've collected across multiple realities. "That sometimes the most perfect systems still need a little chaos to function," he says thoughtfully. As they step back through the glowing green portal, neither of them notices Morty's scanner beginning to beep with an alert that seems impossible. Their home reality somehow registering higher on the happiness potential scale than any perfect world they'd visited so far. When they arrive back in their workshop, Morty finally hears the insistent notification from his device. He taps the screen, his expression shifting from curiosity to confusion. "That's weird." He holds up the scanner, showing Rick a reading that makes no sense to either of them. According to this, our reality, the one we've been trying to escape, is scoring a 94.7 on the happiness potential index. Rick leans in, squinting at the numbers. "Is that thing broken?" "We've seen better worlds than this." He gestures vaguely around the cluttered garage with its oil stains and half-finished inventions. "I don't get it either." Morty immediately starts disassembling the scanner, laying components carefully across his workbench. There must be a calibration error, or maybe the quantum fluctuation compensator is malfunctioning. His fingers move with practiced precision, checking connections and testing circuits. The algorithm doesn't make mistakes like this. While Morty works, Rick paces the garage, occasionally glancing at his grandson with an unreadable expression. Finally, he clears his throat. "Maybe we should just stay home for a bit while you figure it out. I could use a shower and some of those pancakes your mom makes." Morty looks up, surprised by Rick's suggestion. "You actually want to stay here? In this reality?" There's an edge of suspicion in his voice. "The whole point of our project was finding somewhere better for you." Rick shrugs, trying to appear casual. "Just saying it wouldn't hurt to take a breather. Science works better with a clear head." He doesn't mention that part of him is secretly pleased by the scanner's assessment of their home reality. "Fine, I need to run comprehensive diagnostics anyway." Morty connects the scanner to his main computer system, initiating a series of tests. Lines of code scroll rapidly across the screen as the system compares data points from all their interdimensional visits. Over the next few days, Morty barely leaves the garage. He creates a massive digital corkboard displaying data from each reality they visited: atmospheric conditions, social structures, threat assessments, and most importantly, Rick's neurochemical responses in each environment. Food accumulates on one side of his workstation: plates with half-eaten sandwiches brought by his mother, energy drink cans, and candy wrappers. Rick checks on him periodically, bringing fresh coffee and occasionally suggesting Morty take a break. "You know, the family's watching a movie tonight. Some science fiction thing they say got everything wrong. Could be fun to yell at the TV together." But Morty barely acknowledges these invitations, too absorbed in his data analysis. "I've triple-checked every component. The scanner's working perfectly," he mutters, more to himself than to Rick. "Which means there's something I'm missing in the algorithm itself." On the fourth day, Morty sits back in his chair, rubbing his eyes after staring at screens for hours. Something about the pattern of Rick's happiness readings across different realities has finally caught his attention. He begins isolating specific moments from their journey, analyzing what Rick was doing when his happiness levels peaked. In Harmony reality, Rick's highest readings weren't during the peaceful music circle or community dinner, but when he took charge during the storm crisis. In Achievement reality, Rick's happiness spiked not when being celebrated by crowds, but during the brief genuine conversation with his alternate self. Even in Family First reality, Rick's best moments came when he was sketching new designs or explaining how his inventions worked. Morty creates a new data visualization, mapping all these peak moments. Computer, identify common factors in all happiness, spike events across realities, he commands. The system processes for several minutes before displaying its conclusions. Common factors in happiness. Spike events. 1. Subject actively engaged in problem solving. 2. Subject utilizing unique skills. 3. Subject working collaboratively. 4. Subject experiencing sense of purpose. 5. Subject in proximity to family member. Morty stares at the screen, the implications slowly dawning on him. He pulls up the home reality scan again, examining why it scored so highly. Their chaotic home life constantly presents problems to solve. Rick's unusual combination of street smarts and emotional intelligence is uniquely valued here. And despite their dysfunctional family dynamics, they genuinely need each other. When Rick returns to the garage that evening, he finds Morty surrounded by holographic displays showing data from every reality they visited. Figure out why the scanner's on the fritz, he asks, setting down 2 cups of hot chocolate. Morty turns to him with a look of revelation. It's not malfunctioning at all. The algorithm's working exactly as designed. He gestures to the central display showing their home reality's surprisingly high happiness score. I've been analyzing what makes you happy across every dimension we visited, and there's a pattern I completely missed. He brings up a timeline of their adventures, highlighting moments where Rick's happiness levels peaked. See this? In Harmony reality, you were happiest when organizing the storm response. In Achievement reality, your best moment was that heart-to-heart with yourself. Even in Family First reality, you lit up when explaining your inventions to me. Rick sits down, taking a sip of his hot chocolate. So what are you saying exactly? I programmed the algorithm to find the perfect environment for happiness, but happiness isn't just about environment. Morty pulls up a split-screen comparison between their home reality and the others they visited. The perfect peaceful worlds, the ones with no problems? Your readings actually dropped the longer we stayed there. You need challenges to solve, Rick. You need to feel useful. Rick considers this, nodding slowly. Makes sense. Nobody likes feeling useless. But it's more than that. Morty highlights another data point. Your happiness consistently peaks when we're solving problems together. Not when things are perfect, but when things are imperfect and we're facing them as a team. He gestures to an image of their home reality. And guess where that happens most consistently? Rick glances at the visualization of their chaotic home dimension, with its constant crises and family drama. Right here. Exactly. Morty shuts down some of the displays, simplifying the data. All this time, I've been looking for a reality that would make you happy. But what you need isn't a perfect place. It's meaning, purpose, and connection. And somehow, this messy reality of ours provides that better than any of the perfect ones. Rick sits quietly for a moment, processing this revelation. So, all this dimension hopping was for nothing? Not for nothing. Morty smiles slightly. We needed to see all those other possibilities to understand what we already had. He brings up one final graph showing Rick's happiness trending upward throughout their journey. And your overall happiness has been increasing, not because we found the perfect reality, but because of our relationship, working together, supporting each other, facing challenges as a team. Rick looks at the data, then at his grandson with newfound appreciation. Pretty profound conclusion for a science project. I think I've been looking for the wrong thing, Rick, Morty admits quietly. Maybe happiness isn't about finding a perfect place. Maybe it's about who you're with when things get imperfect. Morty stares at the last untested button on his portal device, a pristine white circle unlike all the others. So if imperfection is actually necessary for happiness, then what happens when we encounter actual perfection? He wonders aloud, his scientist's mind already racing toward one final experiment. The thought was almost counterintuitive. Could a world that solved all problems actually create the biggest problem of all, for beings who fundamentally need challenges to thrive? Rick glances up from the journal where he's been documenting their findings from previous reality visits. His expression shows a mixture of curiosity and concern. You mean we're actually going to find out if too much of a good thing is really a bad thing? Seems risky, even for us. The algorithm identified one reality as statistically perfect, Morty explains, pulling up a holographic display showing a reality labeled P1. Every measurement maxes out on traditional happiness metrics. No disease, no conflict, no resource scarcity. Nothing broken that needs fixing. According to all conventional wisdom, this should be paradise. The data scrolling across the projection shows environmental readings that seem almost impossible. Perfect atmospheric composition, optimal temperature range year-round, zero pollutants, and social harmony indicators that suggest a completely peaceful civilization. The scanner designates it as the single most flawless reality in existence. But based on our findings so far, I have a hypothesis, Morty continues, pocketing the scanner. If I'm right, this final test could either confirm or completely dismantle my conclusions about the nature of happiness. Rick runs his hand through his hair and sighs. Fine, one more jump. But if things get weird, and they always get weird, we bail. Deal? He extends his hand, and Morty shakes it firmly. With a press of the white button, the portal materializes. Unlike their usual swirling green vortex, this one shimmers with an opalescent glow, pulsing with gentle waves of light. Stepping through, they emerge into what can only be described as visual perfection, the landscape of reality. P1 unfolds before them in breathtaking harmony. Rolling hills covered in grass, that's exactly the right height sway, gently in a breeze that's neither too strong nor too weak. Trees bearing perfectly formed fruit stand at aesthetically ideal intervals. In the distance, a community of elegant structures reflects sunlight that somehow illuminates everything without casting harsh shadows. Whoa, Rick whispers. Everything is matching, like someone designed it instead of letting it evolve. The residents of this reality notice their arrival and approach with warm, identical smiles. Their clothing flows in complementary pastels, and their movements seem choreographed despite appearing natural. Soft music fills the air without any visible source, changing subtly to complement the mood of conversations. Welcome, travelers, a woman greets them, her voice melodious and soothing. You've arrived just in time for our afternoon gathering. Please, join us. The gathering turns out to be something between a community meeting and a celebration, though it's not clear what they're celebrating. Everyone moves in perfect coordination, serving food that tastes exactly right, not too sweet, not too savory. Conversations flow without awkward pauses or misunderstandings. Rick shifts uncomfortably in his seat as a community elder explains their society. We achieved harmony through complete system optimization. Our environment works with us, not against us. Our social structures eliminate conflict through perfect resource distribution. Nothing ever breaks down because everything is maintained preemptively. So what do you do all day? Rick asks, his fingers drumming restlessly on his knee. We appreciate, the elder responds simply. We appreciate the perfection around us, the company of others, the absence of strife. What else would one need to do? Morty secretly checks his scanner, noting that Rick's dopamine levels, initially elevated by the beautiful surroundings, are now dropping steadily. Serotonin remains flat despite the pleasant. Social interaction and oxytocin is barely registering despite the friendly welcome. As hours pass, Rick becomes increasingly fidgety. He keeps looking around for something to fix or improve. At one point, he notices a fruit hanging slightly lower than others on a nearby tree and reaches up to adjust it, only to find it's actually hanging at the mathematically optimal angle for ripening. When he tries to engage residents in discussion about theoretical improvements to their already perfect systems, they respond with polite confusion. But what if you could make your energy distribution 0.01% more efficient? Rick asks a resident managing their power systems. Why would we need to? Comes the genuine response. We already have exactly what everyone needs. By the third hour, Morty notices Rick's discomfort has transformed into genuine distress. His scanner shows happiness metrics plummeting to levels lower than any previous reality they've visited. Rick paces at the edge of the gathering, occasionally picking up small objects only to put them down again when he finds nothing to adjust or improve. Morty approaches his grandfather, his own face showing signs of boredom. I think I've gathered enough data. Should we head back? Rick practically lunges for the portal device. Please, I can't take another minute of perfection. He almost spits the word. Before they can leave, one of the residents approaches them. Is something wrong? We notice you seem uncomfortable. This is unusual. Most visitors wish to stay. Morty hesitates, his scientific mind wanting to explain their experiment without offending their hosts. We appreciate your hospitality, but we're discovering that what makes us happy might be different from what makes you happy. What could possibly be better than perfection? The resident asks, genuinely curious. Rick's response comes quickly. Imperfection, problems, challenges, things that need fixing. Without those, what's the point of having this? He taps his temple. Or this. He places a hand over his heart. The resident tilts their head, considering this strange concept. But fixing implies something was broken. Being broken is inefficient. Being broken is opportunity, Rick counters. Being broken is life. With that, Morty activates the portal and they step through, leaving the perfect world behind. Back in their garage, Rick collapses into his chair with an exaggerated sigh of relief while Morty downloads the scanner data to his computer. That was awful, Rick groans. Did you notice nobody laughed? Like, really laughed? They smiled and made pleasant noises, but nobody actually lost it over something ridiculous. Morty nods, examining the data. Your happiness metrics in the perfect reality were lower than in any other world we visited, even lower than our baseline reality. After the initial aesthetic appreciation wore off, your neurochemical readings showed patterns consistent with depression. Rick stands and walks to the workbench, picking up a broken device he'd been tinkering with before their experiment began. His fingers immediately start disassembling it, a small smile forming as he identifies the problem. I think I get it now. Perfect doesn't need us. Perfect has no room for improvement, no space for creativity, no reason to try. Morty's scanner, still running in the background, shows Rick's happiness levels rising as he works on the broken device. I think you're right. The data suggests that meaningful engagement, the actual process of solving problems, generates more happiness than existing in a state where all problems are already solved. They fall into comfortable silence as Rick continues working on his repair and Morty organizes their findings. The garage door is slightly crooked on its track. The ceiling has a water stain from last month's leak, and somewhere in the house they can hear Beth and Jerry having another one of their arguments. Yet Rick's happiness reading continues climbing steadily. After a while, Rick sets down his tools and looks at his grandson. You know what, Morty? I'd rather live in a world full of problems I can help solve than a world that doesn't need anything from me. The garage door creaks on its hinges as they step back into the house, back into the beautiful mess they call home. Despite traveling through countless realities searching for the perfect world, neither Rick nor Morty was prepared for the most surprising discovery waiting for them right where they started. The familiar sound of Beth and Jerry's voices echoes from the kitchen, their latest argument about the correct way to load the dishwasher reaching peak intensity. Summer sprawls across the living room couch, her face illuminated by her phone screen, thumbs moving at superhuman speed as she navigates her social media universe. Nothing has changed, and yet everything feels different to our interdimensional travelers. Morty slumps into his desk chair, staring at his multiverse mapping equipment with a furrowed brow. His fingers tap absently on the scanner that's measured countless variations of Rick's happiness across the multiverse. The weight of perceived failure sits heavy on his shoulders. After visiting so many realities and collecting terabytes of data, he still couldn't deliver the one thing he wanted most, a perfect world for his grandfather. Don't need to be a genius to know what that face means, Rick says, leaning against the doorframe of Morty's bedroom. He's holding 2 cans of soda, condensation dripping down the aluminum sides. I've worn it enough times myself. Morty accepts the offered drink without meeting Rick's eyes. We tried 7 more realities after P1, he mumbles, popping the tab. Each one had fatal flaws. I've exhausted every promising candidate in the database. He takes a long sip, then adds, I'm sorry I couldn't find you somewhere better than this. Rick studies his grandson for a moment, then nods toward the window. Got a minute to step outside? Think better with some sky above me. Minutes later, they're sitting side by side on the roof tiles outside Morty's bedroom window, the neighborhood spreading below them like a diorama. The evening sky transitions from orange to deep blue, the first stars beginning to appear. The temperature has dropped just enough to make their sodas feel perfect in their hands. You know what I never told you about my life? Rick says after a comfortable silence. I spent most of it chasing perfect job, perfect invention, perfect version of myself. The older I got, the more I realized perfect doesn't exist. And that's actually the good news. Morty raises an eyebrow. How is that possibly good news? Rick points to a constellation emerging above them. See those stars? They're burning balls of gas millions of miles away. Technically, they're disasters. Constant explosions, radiation, chaos. But from here? He gestures widely. From here, they're beautiful. It's not about finding a reality without problems, Morty. It's about finding the right distance to view the problems you have. Morty considers this, taking another sip of his soda. But the scanner readings were measuring moments, not life, Rick interrupts gently. Life isn't a reading on a device. It's the story you're telling while the device is running. He turns to face his grandson directly. You know when my readings were highest? When we were solving something together. Not when everything was already solved. A shooting star streaks across the darkening sky, and both of them follow its path until it disappears. I worked at a planetarium once, Rick continues. Just for 6 months. Best part of the job was watching kids see the stars projected on the ceiling. They didn't want a perfect simulation. They wanted to point out shapes they recognized, make up stories about what they saw. Their imperfect interpretations were what made it meaningful. Morty pulls his knees to his chest, thinking. I just wanted to fix things for you. I thought if I applied enough science, enough analysis. That's what I love about you, Rick says with uncommon gentleness. But not everything that matters can be measured or fixed. Some things just need to be experienced. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out the small leather journal the peaceful Rick and Morty had given them. This is what I've been thinking about. These versions of us weren't trying to find the perfect place. They were documenting the journey, finding value in each place just as it was. From below, the sound of Beth calling everyone for dinner drifts up to their rooftop perch. But neither moves just yet. What if we did something like that? Rick suggests. Instead of searching for the perfect reality, what if we explored realities to understand them, document them, maybe even help where we can without trying to make them perfect? Morty's eyes light up for the first time since they returned home. A multiverse documentation project instead of a perfect reality project. Exactly, Rick nods, a smile spreading across his face. Every reality has something to teach us, even ours. He gestures toward the kitchen window, where they can see Beth setting the table while Jerry carries a steaming casserole dish with exaggerated caution. Morty sits with the idea, turning it over in his mind. I'd need to recalibrate my equipment, design new measurement parameters focused on learning opportunities rather than happiness metrics. And I could handle the practical aspects, Rick adds. Field notes, cultural observations, that kind of thing. He holds up the journal again. I've already started. For the first time in days, Morty feels the familiar excitement of a new scientific challenge. We could create the most comprehensive guide to the multiverse ever attempted. No one's documented it systematically before. No one with your brain and my experience working together, Rick agrees. the perfect team for an imperfect multiverse. They climb back through the window just as Beth's voice rises to a near shout, calling them to dinner for the third time. As they make their way downstairs, Morty notices the subtle shifts in his perspective. The house's imperfections, the creaky third stair, the slightly peeling wallpaper in the hallway, even the chaos awaiting them in the kitchen, no longer seem like problems to solve, but simply parts of what makes this reality uniquely theirs. At the dinner table, the family falls into their familiar patterns. Jerry attempts to describe a minor workplace triumph, only to have Beth point out a logical flaw in his story. Summer interjects with sarcastic commentary while barely looking up from her phone. But something has shifted in how Rick and Morty observe this tableau. "So are you two done with your little science project?" Beth asks, passing the mashed potatoes to Morty. "The garage smells like you've been burning rubber in there." "Actually," Morty replies, exchanging a glance with Rick, "we're just getting started on a new one." "God help us," Jerry mutters, though there's more affection than malice in his tone. "It's not dangerous, is it?" Beth asks, her concern evident. "Last time you two collaborated, we had those interdimensional parasites posing as long-lost relatives." Rick chuckles. "Nothing like that. We're just documenting what we find, learning instead of changing." The conversation drifts to other topics: Summer's upcoming school dance, Jerry's office politics, Beth's challenging surgery on a prize racehorse. Beneath the surface of typical family dinner chatter, Rick and Morty share occasional knowing looks, their shared secret creating an invisible bond across the table. After dinner, as Jerry and Beth bicker about whose turn it is to load the dishwasher, Rick and Morty slip away to the garage. Morty begins sketching designs for modified scanning equipment while Rick organizes their notes from previous reality visits, adding his own observations that the scanners couldn't detect. "You know," Morty says, looking up from his work, "in all those realities, I never found the perfect place for you to be happy. But I think I found something better." Rick raises an eyebrow. "What's that?" "A perfect purpose for us, together." Morty holds up the blueprint he's been drawing, a new device that combines Rick's observational capabilities with Morty's scientific precision. "We could call it the multiverse chronicler." Rick studies the design, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "You know what, Morty? I think I'd like that better than perfection anyway." Have you ever wondered what would happen if Rick and Morty stumbled into a world of happy little trees and peaceful mountains? Well, this is exactly what we're about to explore as we dive into this uniquely tranquil Rick and Morty adventure. It all begins in the familiar setting of Rick's garage workshop. Morty sits on a small stool, his eyelids growing heavier by the second as Rick rambles on about interdimensional physics. The garage is cluttered with its usual array of bizarre inventions and half-finished experiments. Rick stands at his workbench, wildly gesticulating with a screwdriver in one hand and some unknown alien component in the other. And that's why, Morty, the quantum fluctuations in dimension C-137 are completely different from the ones we're experiencing right now. It's all about the variance in the subatomic. Rick continues, completely oblivious to Morty's state. The boy's head bobs forward, then jerks back up as he desperately tries to stay awake. "Uh-huh, Rick," Morty mumbles, his words slurring slightly. "That's really interesting." His eyes close for just a moment too long, and then it happens. Morty's consciousness begins to slip away, and as it does, something unusual occurs in the garage around him. The harsh fluorescent lighting softens, becoming a warm golden glow. The clutter of metal tools and gadgets starts to blur at the edges. Colors that were once stark and clinical begin to shift, becoming richer and more vibrant. The cold concrete floor beneath Morty's feet seems to soften, taking on the texture of springy moss. Even the air changes, the smell of motor oil and chemical solutions giving way to the fresh scent of pine and clean mountain air. Rick pauses mid-explanation, noticing Morty's head drooping forward. But instead of the usual frustrated wake-up call we might expect, Rick's expression changes to one of curious interest. He reaches into his lab coat pocket and pulls out a small device we've never seen before. It's sleek and simple, with a single button on its surface and a small needle attachment. "Perfect timing, Morty," Rick whispers, unusually gentle. "You just gave me the opportunity I've been waiting for." He presses the device against his own temple, then reaches over and does the same to Morty. Dream invasion device, baby. Let's see what's going on in that subconscious of yours. As Rick activates the device, both their bodies remain in the garage, but their consciousnesses slip into Morty's dream world. The transformation is complete and absolutely stunning. We see a perfect Bob Ross landscape materialize around them, sweeping mountains with snow-capped peaks, happy little trees clustered along gentle slopes, and a crystal-clear lake that mirrors the impossibly blue sky above. Fluffy clouds drift lazily across the horizon, catching the golden light of a sun that seems to bathe everything in warmth. Without being too harsh or bright, Morty finds himself standing at the edge of the lake, completely unaware that he's dreaming, or that Rick has followed him in. He takes a deep breath, his shoulders relaxing visibly as his face shows an expression we rarely see on him during their adventures. Pure, untroubled calm. Wow, ... Morty says softly, his voice lacking its usual anxious edge. This is really nice. The dream world around him seems to respond to this simple expression of contentment. The grass beneath his feet grows softer, tiny wildflowers blooming between blades of green. From the edge of the nearby forest, gentle animal companions begin to emerge. A deer with large, trusting eyes, a fox with an unusually friendly demeanor, small birds that land without fear on nearby branches, their songs creating a natural symphony. Morty kneels down as a rabbit hops directly up to him, allowing him to pet its soft fur. I've never seen animals act like this before, he says to himself, wonder in his voice. That's because we're not in reality, Morty, comes Rick's voice from behind him. But it's different, calmer, gentler, less abrasive. Morty turns to see his grandfather approaching, still recognizably Rick with his wild hair and lab coat. But something about him is noticeably softer. His perpetual scowl is gone, replaced by a mild expression of interest. His movements lack their usual jerky urgency. Rick, what are you doing here? Morty asks. But strangely, he doesn't seem alarmed by Rick's presence in what he still doesn't recognize as his own dream. Just thought I'd join you for a bit, Dream Rick replies, gazing out over the landscape. Nice place you've created here. This dream version of Rick doesn't belch between sentences or take swigs from a flask. He simply stands beside Morty, taking in the scene with something approaching appreciation, a stark contrast to his usual dismissive attitude toward beauty or tranquility. I created this? Morty asks, looking around with newfound interest. Your mind did, Rick explains, kneeling to examine a particularly vibrant patch of moss. Interesting physics at work here. Everything responds to your emotional state. Notice how the water ripples when you feel curious, and how the light brightens when you feel happy. Morty observes that Rick is right. The dream landscape is subtly shifting in response to his feelings. When he thinks about how peaceful everything is, the breeze becomes gentler. When he wonders about the mountains in the distance, a path seems to form, inviting exploration. This is what you needed, Morty, Rick says, gesturing to the panorama before them. A world where happy accidents are welcome and mistakes can be fixed with a gentle brushstroke. No danger, no pressure, no expectations. Morty nods slowly, understanding dawning on his face. It's like I can control things here, but not in a stressful way. Like whatever happens is okay. While Morty takes in the tranquil scene, we see Rick beginning to examine the dream environment with quiet scientific curiosity. He runs his fingers through the air, observing how it ripples like water. He picks up a rock and tosses it into the lake, watching closely as the splash creates concentric circles that spread too far and too perfectly to be natural. His eyes narrow slightly, the familiar scientist in him awakening even in this peaceful setting. Rick pulls a small device from his pocket, different from the dream invasion tool, and discreetly scans various elements of the landscape while Morty is distracted by a butterfly landing on his finger. Rick's expression shifts between genuine fascination and calculating interest, setting up the gentle tension that will build throughout our story. That gentle butterfly on Morty's finger isn't just part of the dream. It's the first test subject in Rick's covert experiment. Even in the most tranquil corners of Morty's mind, Rick can't help but tinker with reality, introducing impossibilities disguised as dream logic that will slowly transform this peaceful refuge into something else entirely. "Hey Morty, you ever try painting in a dream before?" Rick asks, his voice gentler than usual as he produces two easels seemingly from nowhere. Each canvas stands blank against the backdrop of rolling hills, waiting for their creative touch. Rick hands Morty a paintbrush that feels impossibly light, yet perfectly balanced in his hand. Dreams are they're like the ultimate canvas, you know? No rules, no physics, just pure imagination. Morty tentatively dips his brush into a palette of colors that seem to shift slightly when he's not looking directly at them. As he makes his first stroke across the canvas, something extraordinary happens. The blue he paints for the sky extends beyond the canvas, bleeding into the actual dreamscape. Where his brush creates mountains on the canvas, actual mountains begin forming in the distance. "Whoa! Rick, did you see that?" Morty exclaims, his excitement causing nearby flowers to bloom instantly. "The painting is changing the dream." "That's how it works in here, Morty," Rick explains, his own brush creating a stream that immediately begins flowing through the meadow. Dream physics are basically just emotional algorithms responding to creative input. You think it, you feel it, you paint it, it becomes real. As they continue painting, Morty becomes immersed in the process, his concentration intense. While Morty focuses on his canvas, Rick subtly reaches into his lab coat pocket and removes a tiny metallic sphere no bigger than a marble. He casually drops it into the stream he created, where it dissolves and disperses into the flowing water, causing it to momentarily flow uphill before returning to normal. Morty glances up just as the water returns to its natural direction. "Rick, did that water just catching the light funny, Morty?" "Dream lighting, you know how it is." "Keep painting. You're really getting the hang of this," Rick interrupts, directing Morty's attention back to his canvas. "Try adding some trees over there." When Morty creates a forest with his brush, Rick suggests they explore it up close. "Let's take a walk through your masterpiece, Morty. Really experience what you've created." As they wander among the trees, Morty marvels at how real everything feels. The texture of bark beneath his fingers, the scent of pine, the soft crunch of fallen leaves beneath their feet. While Morty examines a particularly interesting rock formation, Rick quickly attaches a small device to the underside of a tree branch. The device pulses once with a soft blue light, before camouflaging itself to match the bark perfectly. Immediately, the clouds overhead begin to form unusual spiral patterns, though they disperse back into normal shapes when Morty looks up. "You know, Morty," Rick says as they continue walking, "these dream landscapes operate on what you might call hybrid dimensional principles." He gestures with his brush, creating a small pond that forms instantly. "It's actually pretty similar to what I was explaining back in the garage about quantum fluctuations." "This is way easier to understand than your garage lectures," Morty admits, watching a fish jump from the pond in a perfect arc that seems to hang in the air slightly too long before splashing back down. "That's because we're using the dream's visualization capabilities," Rick explains, demonstrating by painting a series of concentric circles in the air. The circles remained suspended, gradually transforming into a model of atomic structure. "See, when I talked about electrons existing in probability clouds rather than fixed orbits, this is what I meant." Not so boring now, is it? Morty watches in fascination as the atomic model Rick created begins to pulse and shift in ways that somehow make perfect sense to him now. "It's like I can feel the science instead of just hearing about it." "Exactly," Rick says, his excitement genuine. Dream cognition bypasses the logical centers and goes straight to intuitive understanding. Way more efficient than conventional teaching methods. As they continue their journey through the dream landscape, Rick makes more subtle adjustments when Morty isn't looking. A flower that plays musical notes when touched. A tree whose shadow falls in the opposite direction from all the others. A cloud that rains upward rather than downward. Each change is small enough that Morty doesn't immediately register it as unusual, just another quirk of dream logic. But the cumulative effect of these alterations begins to shift the atmosphere. The peaceful serenity now contains undercurrents of something else. Curiosity, wonder, and the faintest hint of scientific inquiry. The dream world is no longer responding purely to Morty's emotional state, but has begun incorporating elements of Rick's consciousness as well. Try using this technique, Rick suggests, showing Morty how to make broad sweeping strokes that seem to bend the light around them. It's called quantum brushwork. Lets you paint possibilities rather than certainties. Morty attempts to mimic Rick's technique, creating a butterfly that seems to exist in multiple places simultaneously. This is amazing, Rick. It's like I'm painting with probability. Now you're getting it, Rick says, carefully observing how the dreamscape responds to their combined influence. When Morty isn't watching, Rick takes readings on a small device concealed in his palm, nodding with satisfaction at the results. As they approach a copse of particularly vibrant trees, Rick points out interesting features: the way the light filters through leaves, how the branches form natural archways. What Rick doesn't mention is that some of the leaves are now arranging themselves into complex patterns that look suspiciously like differential equations, the mathematical formulas camouflaged among the natural veins and structures of the foliage. Hey Rick, is it just me or do these trees seem different somehow? Morty asks, peering closely at a leaf without quite identifying what's unusual about it. Dreams evolve, Morty. They're responsive environments, Rick says dismissively. Your subconscious is probably just incorporating more detailed patterns as you become more comfortable here. What Rick doesn't say is that he's carefully calibrating the dream to respond to his inputs while maintaining its peaceful appearance. Each small device he plants works to subtly reshape the underlying structure of the dreamscape, creating a network of scientific instruments disguised as natural elements. The butterfly that landed on Morty's finger earlier now flies from tree to tree, its wings occasionally displaying complex data patterns as it passes over Rick's hidden devices. As they continue their artistic exploration of the dreamscape, the world around them remains beautiful and serene, but increasingly infused with Rick's scientific fingerprints, a hidden laboratory disguised as a paradise where dream physics are being carefully documented, measured, and gradually manipulated. The forest parts to reveal a scene Morty never consciously imagined but somehow always wished for: his family existing in perfect harmony. While Rick's devices may control the dream's physics, they can't account for the most unpredictable element of all: how Morty's sleeping mind portrays the people he simultaneously loves and fears the most. Hey Morty, check it out, Rick says, pointing toward a clearing that wasn't there moments ago. Looks like your subconscious has some other stuff it wants to show us. The painted forest trail opens into a sun-dappled meadow where familiar silhouettes move about in ways Morty has never witnessed in waking life. Summer sits cross-legged in a garden unlike any on Earth, tending to flowers that pulse with gentle bioluminescence. Their petals unfold in fractal patterns, each bloom splitting into perfect miniature copies of itself before reassembling. Wow, I didn't know Summer was even interested in gardening, Morty says, approaching his dream sister. Summer looks up, her expression serene and lacking its usual sardonic edge. These flowers only grow when you nurture them with patience, she explains, her voice melodic and wise. Each one represents a different dimension we've visited. She holds up a particularly complex blossom. This one's from the world where everyone had 64 teeth, remember? Rick narrows his eyes. Interesting. We never went to a dimension like that. Of course we did, Dream Summer replies with absolute certainty, though her image briefly flickers, revealing static underneath before stabilizing again. You just forgot because of the time loop. In this garden, impossible vines twist upward to form archways that lead to different growing sections, each organized by some logic only Summer seems to understand. As she works, the plants respond to her touch by creating musical tones that harmonize together into a soothing melody. Your subconscious sees Summer as the organizer of chaos, Rick whispers to Morty. She's creating order from the random elements of your adventures. Pretty telling about how you actually see her role in the family. Morty nods, watching Dream Summer work with a focus and purpose he's rarely seen in her real-life counterpart. While they're observing, Rick casually drops what looks like a seed near the garden's edge. It immediately burrows into the soil unnoticed. Beyond Summer's garden, another clearing reveals Jerry sitting on a stump, surrounded by attentive squirrels holding tiny paintbrushes. Each rodent creates masterpieces on miniature canvases, while Jerry offers gentle encouragement. "That's it. Express yourselves through art," Dream Jerry says, his voice carrying confidence Morty has never heard from his father. "Remember, there are no wrong brushstrokes, only new perspectives." The squirrels chatter appreciatively, their paintings depicting complex scenes from across the multiverse with technical skill far exceeding Jerry's own artistic abilities. One squirrel shows Jerry its work, a perfectly rendered portal swirling with accurate interdimensional physics. "Excellent understanding of the quantum chromatics," Dream Jerry says, nodding knowingly. "The way you've captured the dimensional variance in the third quadrant is inspired." "This is weird," Morty whispers to Rick. "Dad doesn't know anything about quantum whatever he just said." Rick studies the scene with growing fascination. "Your dad exists in a perpetual state of feeling inferior to everyone around him. But here, your mind has given him authority over creatures smarter than himself. He's a teacher respected by his students, exactly what Jerry has always wanted to be but never managed." Dream Jerry's lesson is interrupted when he notices Morty and Rick. "Oh, hey guys. The squirrels and I are just exploring the intersection between art and multidimensional theory. Did you know these little fellows understand the universe better than most advanced civilizations?" As Dream Jerry speaks, his form occasionally stutters like a video with dropped frames, his sentences sometimes trailing into nonsensical territory before snapping back to coherence. Once, his voice briefly changes to sound exactly like Principal Vagina before returning to normal mid-sentence. When they move on, Rick places something that looks like a tiny metallic nut beneath Jerry's stump, pressing it into the dream soil with his heel. Following the sound of gentle humming, they discover Beth in a grove where trees appear wounded, some with broken branches, others with split trunks or diseased leaves. Dream Beth moves among them wearing a doctor's headlamp, performing intricate procedures with tools that transform from medical instruments to gardening implements and back again. "The cellular structure is responding to the treatment," she murmurs to a particularly gnarled oak. She carefully grafts a healthy branch onto its trunk, and the tree visibly straightens, its bark smoothing and leaves brightening. "You'll be strong enough to support nests again by springtime." The trees around her seem almost sentient, bending their branches toward her as if in gratitude. Some produce fruit that glows with healing energy, while others grow leaves inscribed with anatomical diagrams that flutter in the breeze. "This one's pretty on the nose," Rick observes. "Your mom's whole veterinarian career has been her attempt to heal what she perceives as broken. Here, she's literally healing nature itself." Morty watches as Dream Beth tenderly wraps a bandage around a sapling. "Is that how I really see her?" "Your subconscious doesn't lie, Morty, though it does tend to exaggerate." Rick points to where the trees Beth has healed form a protective circle around her workspace. "Look how they shield her from the rest of the forest. You see her as both healer and someone who needs protection." When Dream Beth notices them, she waves cheerfully. "Rick, Morty, I just discovered a hybrid grafting technique that allows consciousness transfer between plant species. Want to see?" Her demeanor is completely free of the resentment or emotional guardedness that often colors her interactions with Rick. As Dream Beth demonstrates her technique, her appearance occasionally shifts, for a split second appearing as Space Beth before returning to normal. Sometimes her sentences contain terminology no Earth doctor would know, referencing alien anatomies and interdimensional healing practices. While Morty is distracted by Beth's demonstration, Rick discreetly attaches a small device to the underside of her workbench. "It's fascinating how your mind represents your family," Rick says as they walk away. Everyone performing idealized versions of their actual personalities. Summer bringing order to chaos, Jerry teaching rather than being taught, Beth healing instead of just maintaining. Classic wish fulfillment. "Is that bad?" Morty asks, glancing back at his dream family, each contentedly engaged in their impossible activities. "Not bad, just revealing," Rick replies. "Dreams don't just show what we want. They show what we believe could be possible under the right circumstances. Your subconscious thinks your family has potential they're not reaching in waking life." As they continue walking, the dream family members occasionally call out to them with information or observations that seem disconnected from reality. Summer mentions a trip they never took, Jerry references a skill he doesn't possess. Beth uses terminology from alien medicine. Why do they keep saying weird stuff? Morty asks. Dreams can't maintain perfect consistency, Rick explains. Your brain is trying to create fully realized versions of people it only partially understands. The glitches happen when your subconscious fills gaps with random information, or when my devices interact with your dream logic. Speaking of dream logic, Rick says, pulling Morty toward a shimmer in the air where colors seem to fold into themselves. Have you ever wondered why things in dreams can behave in ways that would be impossible in waking life? There's actually a fascinating explanation for that. The shimmer expands as they approach, revealing a perfect circular clearing that wasn't visible from the forest path. The trees around the perimeter bend inward slightly, as if drawn to the center by an invisible force. At the heart of the clearing sits what appears to be a laboratory constructed entirely of dream matter. Workbenches made of clouds that somehow support solid equipment, walls that exist only as suggestions of boundaries, and a ceiling that opens directly to stars despite the daylight surrounding them. Welcome to my dream physics lab, Rick announces with uncharacteristic warmth. This is where the real fun begins. Morty approaches one of the cloud tables cautiously. Is this still part of my dream, or did you create this? Both, Rick explains, picking up what looks like a paintbrush made of liquid metal. I've established a zone where the rules are even more flexible than in the rest of your dreamscape. Here, we can experiment with pure dream physics without the limitations your subconscious usually imposes to maintain a sense of normality. Rick hands Morty the brush, which ripples at his touch and adjusts to fit his grip perfectly. Try painting something, but don't limit yourself to the canvas. When Morty hesitantly strokes the brush through the air, it leaves a trail of golden light that hangs suspended. With growing confidence, he draws a simple spiral that begins to rotate slowly once completed. In this space, Rick continues, intention matters more than execution. The dream responds to what you mean to create, rather than what you actually draw. Morty concentrates on the idea of a small pond. His next brush stroke opens into a perfect circle of water that hovers in midair, its surface rippling with tiny waves despite nothing touching it. Whoa, Morty whispers, dipping his finger into the floating water. It's actually wet. Rick nods appreciatively. Dream matter exists in a state of quantum possibility. It responds to conscious observation and emotional input rather than classical physics. He picks up his own brush and paints a series of overlapping circles that expand into a model of atomic structure. Remember what I was saying about quantum fluctuations before you dozed off? This is the visual representation of that concept. With a confident stroke, Morty paints an arc above them, intending it to be a rainbow. Instead, it manifests as a bridge of prismatic light stretching across the clearing. Without hesitation, he climbs the solid light structure, discovering he can walk on the colors themselves. The physical laws here follow emotional logic, Rick calls up to him. Try changing the sky color. Just imagine it changing and use the brush as a focus point. Morty points his brush upward, and as he concentrates, patches of the blue sky shift to purple, then orange, creating a sunset effect that shouldn't be possible at this time of day. The light across the clearing transforms accordingly, casting everything in a warm glow. I've never felt this kind of control before, Morty says, sliding down the rainbow bridge with newfound confidence. Not on our adventures, not at school, nowhere. That's because you're working with the dream instead of against it, Rick explains, creating a doorway of light that opens to a different part of the forest they explored earlier. Dreams operate on a principle similar to weak interdimensional boundaries. The dividing line between thought and reality is thinner here. Morty focuses on the concept of water behaving differently. With broad, sweeping motions, he pulls streams from the floating pond that flow through the air like ribbons, twisting into complex helixes and flowing upward against gravity. The water catches the light from the altered sky, creating prismatic patterns throughout the clearing. Most dreamers never realize they can do this, Rick says, walking through a waterfall that flows sideways without getting wet. They accept whatever their subconscious presents without questioning or directing it. Emboldened, Morty begins creating more complex structures, a castle with towers that connect to each other despite being physically separated. a garden where flowers bloom and then transform into butterflies that leave trails of light as they fly. Each creation follows its own internal logic, Rick points out, analyzing one of the light butterflies that lands on his finger. That's why even impossible things feel natural in dreams. They're consistent with their own rules, just not with waking reality's rules. As Morty's confidence grows, the entire clearing responds. Trees at the perimeter grow crystalline fruits that chime musically when breeze touches them. The ground beneath their feet develops patterns that shift and change with each step, like ripples in sand. Try creating a doorway, Rick suggests. Not just a visual representation like mine, but a functional connection to somewhere else in the dream. Morty concentrates, drawing an arched doorframe in the air. Instead of opening to another location, the space within the arch becomes a window showing multiple possible destinations simultaneously. The mountain peak they saw earlier, the family garden, and several places they haven't visited yet. Multidimensional thinking, Rick exclaims, genuinely impressed. You're intuitively grasping concepts that took me years to understand scientifically. Dream physics operates on possibility matrices rather than linear paths. Morty reaches into the doorway and discovers he can select which destination becomes dominant. As he focuses on the mountain peak, the other images fade, and the doorway solidifies into a portal to that location. In waking life, we perceive time and space as fixed constants, Rick explains, examining the doorway's edge where reality seamlessly transitions between locations. But in dreams, and in certain interdimensional states, they're more like variables in an equation that responds to conscious input. While Rick continues his analysis, Morty experiments with combining elements, creating clouds that rain upward, trees that grow in fractal patterns impossible in nature, and animals made of pure light that move with liquid grace through the clearing. Notice how your emotional state affects the stability of your creations, Rick points out. When you're confident, they maintain consistent properties. When you doubt yourself, they fluctuate. Sure enough, when Morty questions whether light can really form solid objects, the luminous animals begin to flicker and lose coherence. When he reasserts his confidence, they stabilize again. The dream responds to your belief in what's possible, Rick says. There's no objective limitation here, only the boundaries you create through expectation. Those boundaries of expectation begin to waver at the edges of Morty's vision. Subtle at first, like a watercolor painting left in the rain. Have you ever noticed how dreams start perfectly normal until that one weird detail that makes you question everything? The happy little trees they painted earlier seem different now, their branches moving slightly even when there's no breeze. Rick? Morty points to a cluster of pine trees whose needles have begun to shimmer with an iridescent glow. Is that supposed to happen? Rick glances over casually, waving his hand dismissively. Just normal dream fluctuations, Morty. Dreams are never static environments. They're constantly reinterpreting themselves based on subconscious stimuli. But Morty can't shake the feeling that something's changing. The colors around them have intensified, becoming almost painfully vibrant. The gentle blue sky now pulses with an electric azure that seems to vibrate the air itself. When Morty looks away from objects and then back again, they seem slightly different, as if they've rearranged themselves during that brief moment of inattention. I swear that mountain was shaped differently a minute ago, Morty says, pointing to a peak in the distance that now resembles a perfect logarithmic spiral. While Morty's attention is focused on the horizon, Rick quickly reaches into his lab coat and activates another of his hidden devices. It emits a soft pulse that ripples through the dreamscape like a stone dropped in water. You're just getting more tuned into the dream frequency, Morty. It's like adjusting your eyes underwater. Everything looks clearer the longer you stay submerged. A squirrel scampers past them, but when Morty blinks, he notices it now has 3 tails and eyes that glow with an inner light. The creature pauses, staring directly at him. The numbers don't add up at the edges, it says, in a voice that sounds like rustling leaves before disappearing into the undergrowth. Did that squirrel just talk to me about numbers? Morty asks, his voice rising with concern. Rick quickly guides Morty toward a clearing where a small pond has formed. Hey, check this out instead. I bet you can make the water flow upward if you concentrate hard enough. The distraction works momentarily as Morty focuses on the water, which does indeed begin to defy gravity, forming a liquid spiral that rises toward the sky. But as soon as Morty's concentration breaks, he notices more disturbing changes. The trees at the edge of the clearing have developed faces, not cartoonish friendly faces, but eerily realistic ones with eyes that follow their movements and mouths that whisper when neither of them is looking directly at them. Morty can almost make out what they're saying, something about boundary integrity and consciousness leakage. The deer they met earlier reappears, but now it has patterns across its hide that resemble circuit boards, and its antlers branch in impossible fractal patterns. It approaches Morty cautiously, tilts its head, and blinks, revealing a third eye in the center of its forehead that seems to look through Morty rather than at him. "Rick, seriously, something's wrong with the dream," Morty insists. "Everything's getting weird." Rick sighs dramatically. "Fine, Morty. Dreams have stability thresholds. Once you start manipulating them extensively, they can become more susceptible to subconscious influence." He gestures broadly. "What you're seeing is probably just your own anxiety manifesting. The more you worry about the dream getting weird, the weirder it gets." Classic feedback loop. As if to prove Rick's point, the sky above them flickers momentarily, revealing what looks like a star chart of an unfamiliar galaxy before returning to normal. In the distance, the mountains continue their subtle reshaping, forming what appear to be three-dimensional representations of complex equations that Morty recognizes from Rick's whiteboard in the garage. "Let me show you something that'll help," Rick says, leading Morty to a small stream. "Focus on the water and try creating some fish. Simple ones, nothing fancy. Concrete visualization helps stabilize the dream matrix." Morty follows Rick's instructions, and sure enough, several golden fish appear in the stream. For a moment, the dreamscape seems to settle, the colors returning to their normal vibrancy. But when one of the fish jumps from the water, it leaves a trail of glowing symbols in the air that hang like Christmas lights before slowly fading. "See? You've got this," Rick says encouragingly, but Morty notices him surreptitiously adjusting a dial on a device half hidden in his palm. The moment he does, the shadows around them briefly detach from their sources, sliding across the ground like independent creatures before snapping back into place. The path ahead of them begins to shift subtly as they walk, the destination constantly changing. What first appeared to be leading to a mountain lake now seems to curve toward a forest glade, and then toward what looks like a doorway standing alone in a field. Morty has to concentrate harder with each step to maintain his sense of direction. "The thing about dreams, Morty," Rick explains as they walk, "is that they exist at the intersection of consciousness and subconsciousness. Right now, your dream is incorporating elements from both your mind and, well, let's say external influences." "You mean your weird science stuff?" Morty asks, watching as a cloud overhead briefly forms into the shape of Rick's portal gun before dissolving. "Precisely. The dream is responding to multiple inputs now. Your creative visualization, your subconscious anxieties, and my experimental adjustments." Rick pauses to examine a flower that has bloomed at their feet. A rose whose petals are transparent like glass and contain what appear to be miniature galaxies. "Fascinating hybrid manifestation," he mutters. As they continue walking, Morty realizes with growing concern that maintaining the dream's original peaceful state requires increasingly active concentration. Each time his focus wavers, new anomalies appear. Birds with too many wings, plants that glow with inner light, rocks that hover slightly above the ground. The boundaries between what Morty created and what's being influenced by Rick's devices grow increasingly blurred. "It's like trying to hold water in my hands," Morty says. "The harder I try to keep everything normal, the more it slips through my fingers." Rick nods. "That's the nature of consciousness interfaces, Morty. Nothing stays fixed when two different processing systems overlap. What you're experiencing is the creative tension between order and chaos, between your desire for a structured dreamscape and the natural tendency of dreams toward fluid, associative states." In the distance, the forest they painted earlier has begun to grow crystalline structures among its branches. Beautiful formations that catch the light and fracture it into impossible spectra. The effect is simultaneously breathtaking and unsettling. Beauty and strangeness, coexisting in ways that shouldn't be possible. Through the crystalline prism of a tree branch, Morty notices a shadow that doesn't move like any natural forest creature. It pauses, shifts, and seems to examine the surroundings with deliberate curiosity. This isn't part of his dream design. This is something entirely new. Rick? There's something over there. Morty points toward the shadowy form that now appears to be investigating one of Rick's hidden devices. The figure becomes clearer as it moves into a patch of fractured light. A being with translucent skin that reveals a network of glowing veins pulsing in patterns reminiscent of circuit boards. That's what happens when you create a dimensional sweet spot, Morty, Rick explains, watching the creature with surprising calmness. The crystal formations aren't just pretty, they're interdimensional beacons. We've basically turned your dream into the Switzerland of the multiverse, neutral territory that draws in visitors. The crystalline visitor touches one of Rick's devices, sending ripples of light through its transparent body. Rather than seeming threatening, the creature appears fascinated, communicating its findings to others like it through patterns of light that dance across its surface. They're harmless dimensional travelers, Morty. They exist between realities. They're just checking out the neighborhood, Rick says, approaching the nearest one with a casual wave. The being responds by projecting a series of geometric patterns in the air between them, a form of greeting. As they venture deeper into the forest, Morty stops short at the edge of a clearing. There, working in perfect synchronized harmony, is a group of blue Meeseeks, but unlike any Meeseeks he's encountered before. Rather than their usual manic energy and desperate need to fulfill a task before ceasing to exist, these dream Meeseeks are calmly painting an enormous mural across the forest floor. Look at me. I'm expressing the fundamental harmony of multiple dimensions through color theory, one Meeseeks announces cheerfully, applying brush strokes that somehow exist in 3 dimensions simultaneously. Existence is meaningful when creating beauty, another responds, without any hint of the existential pain that normally characterizes their species. Rick approaches the mural, studying it with genuine interest. In your dream, Meeseeks don't suffer from existence. They find purpose in it. Pretty profound for a kid who falls asleep during lectures. Morty watches as the Meeseeks create patterns that shift and change depending on the viewing angle. From one perspective, the mural depicts the garage where his physical body still sleeps. From another, it shows landscapes from adventures they've had, and from yet another, worlds they've never seen. They're not just painting pictures, Morty. They're creating dimensional windows, Rick explains. Your dream is becoming a nexus point. The visitors don't stop with the crystalline beings and Meeseeks. As they continue exploring, Morty notices familiar aliens from past adventures appearing throughout the landscape, but transformed into peaceful, creative entities. A group of Gromflamites, the bureaucratic insectoids of the Galactic Federation, have manifested as luminous butterflies. Instead of enforcing harsh regulations with weaponry, they pollinate dream flowers, leaving trails of bureaucratic stamps that bloom into new plants wherever they touch down. The Federation can't reach us here, so your subconscious made them useful instead of threatening, Rick notes, as one lands briefly on his shoulder, stamping a tiny approved mark before fluttering away. In a meadow beyond the forest, towering Gazorpians tend to gardens of impossible plants. These typically aggressive, gendered aliens now work in perfect harmony, their masculine and feminine aspects balanced as they nurture crystalline flora that grows into architectural structures. Hey, check this out, Rick says, pointing toward the sky where giant floating heads, cromulons, drift like clouds. Instead of demanding entertainment and threatening destruction, they emit harmonic tones that blend into a strange, beautiful music. Your subconscious turned planet-destroying heads into musical notes. Morty approaches a small gathering of various alien species clustered around an empty space in the air. A snake-like creature extends what appears to be a brush made from its own scales, painting colors that hang suspended. A Traflorchian adds geometric patterns that orbit the colors like planets around a sun. Tentatively, Morty picks up a brush that materializes at his feet and adds a sweeping blue curve to their creation. The aliens respond with movements that seem appreciative, adding elements that complement his contribution. They're using art to communicate, Rick observes. Universal language that transcends dimensional barriers and language limitations. Not bad, Morty. With each new visitor, the dream landscape expands and transforms. What began as a simple Bob Ross-inspired world has evolved into a vast interdimensional exhibition of impossible art forms. Floating platforms showcase sculptures made of light and shadow. Forest pathways wind between installations that change based on the observer's thoughts. And in one clearing, a group of unity-connected beings create a hive-mind poetry performance that manifests as physical text flowing through the air. The dream is responding to them as much as it responds to us now, Rick explains, as they watch a gearhead construct a delicate mechanical flower that ticks and whirs with perfect rhythm. It's becoming a collaborative art piece. Morty discovers he can understand the visitors without words. When he approaches a small cluster of Flargonians, typically aggressive traders, they're arranging patterns of stones that somehow convey complex ideas about dimensional travel. When Morty rearranges a few stones, the aliens respond with excitement, showing him how his pattern revealed a new concept they hadn't considered. "You're speaking interdimensional art, Morty," Rick says, with something close to pride in his voice. Most humans never figure that out, even in dreams. As more visitors arrive, drawn by the growing interdimensional beacon of the crystalline forest, the dreamscape continues expanding beyond its original boundaries. New territories unfold like the pages of a pop-up book. Desert landscapes where sand forms into animated sculptures, ocean realms where water behaves like conscious crystal, and anti-gravity domains where thought itself becomes visible as colored light. "We're way beyond the normal dream capacity now," Rick notes as they stand at the edge of a vast amphitheater that has formed to accommodate the gathering visitors. Beings from across the multiverse contribute to a collective artwork at the center, each edition somehow harmonizing with the whole, despite the wildly different natures of the creators. The usual tensions and conflicts that characterize these species in the waking multiverse are absent. Here, in the neutral territory of Morty's dream, Gazorpians work alongside Zagarians, Federation insects collaborate with resistance fighters, and predator species assist their usual prey in artistic endeavors. As the peaceful harmony of the interdimensional gathering continues to flourish, a subtle shift begins to occur within the dream landscape. The change is almost imperceptible at first. A faint tremor in the air, a momentary flicker in the crystalline structures forming throughout the amphitheater. Morty, engaged in silent conversation with a group of Flargonians, suddenly feels a cold sensation at the back of his neck. Dark clouds form overhead, seemingly out of nowhere, but Rick immediately recognizes their source isn't meteorological. The storm brewing above them pulses with mathematical equations and fragments of English text. Equations Morty recognizes from his last algebra exam, and words from an essay he never finished. As the first few droplets fall, they don't splash but rather unfold into miniature paper airplanes that circle Morty's head before dissolving into puffs of anxious smoke. "Your subconscious is getting a bit chatty, Morty," Rick observes, watching as the previously docile environment begins responding to Morty's rising unease. Dreams might be Switzerland for interdimensional visitors, but they're still primarily processing centers for your own psychological garbage. Morty watches in dismay as several floating test papers materialize before him, each marked with a bold red F that seems to glow with accusatory intensity. The papers flutter around him like wounded birds, their corners sharp enough to slice through the peaceful atmosphere he'd worked so hard to maintain. "I don't understand," Morty says, reaching out cautiously toward one of the papers. "Everything was perfect. Why is this happening now?" As his fingertips touch the nearest test, it instantly transforms into a delicate origami butterfly, its wings inscribed with correct answers to problems he'd missed. The butterfly joins a growing collection of similar transformations, creating a small flock that hovers nearby, waiting. "Your brain's processing your daily anxieties, Morty. That's what dreams do," Rick explains, while adjusting a small device on his wrist. "The more control you gained over this dreamscape, the more your subconscious found backdoor access points. Basic dream mechanics." Across the amphitheater, the gathered aliens continue their artistic collaborations, but now their creations take on elements of Morty's concerns. A sculpture being crafted by the Unity Collective begins to resemble a school locker that periodically slams shut with an echoing bang. A musical composition performed by the Cromulons incorporates the grating sound of Principal Vagina's morning announcements. Morty's attention is suddenly drawn to a distant hillside where a familiar figure stands alone. Jessica, her hair catching impossible light in a way that makes her appear to glow against the darkening landscape. Without thinking, Morty begins walking toward her, only to find that the path keeps stretching and twisting away from his destination. "She's always just out of reach," he mutters, a wave of frustration washing over him. The ground responds immediately, the path crumbling behind him as thorny vines sprout from the earth. Rick appears beside him, having seemingly teleported across the dreamscape. "Your relationship anxieties are manifesting physically. Pretty standard stuff for a hormonal teenage mind." Every path Morty attempts leads him in circles or to entirely different sections of the dreamscape. In one attempt, he finds himself back at the amphitheater. In another, he emerges into a recreation of the school cafeteria where all the food is served on test papers and the milk cartons have Jessica's face printed on the side. As Morty's frustration grows, the entire dream environment becomes increasingly unstable. The previously gentle lighting flashes with intensity during moments of his anger, and the ground rumbles when his confidence wavers. The interdimensional visitors begin to look concerned, their artistic collaborations pausing as they sense the shifting emotional currents. "I can't control it anymore," Morty says, watching as memories from past adventures begin materializing as three-dimensional paintings that hover in the air. One depicts the time he accidentally released a love potion that nearly destroyed humanity. Another shows the graves he dug for alternative versions of himself and Rick. Rick steps forward, placing a hand on Morty's shoulder. "You're thinking about it all wrong. Control isn't about suppression. It's about acknowledgement and transformation. Watch." Rick approaches one of the memory paintings, a particularly disturbing image of Morty's time as a hostage on the Zazirian scam ship. With a casual gesture, Rick reaches into the painting and begins rearranging elements, turning the terrifying memory into an absurdist collage that loses its emotional power with each adjustment. "See? It's still your memory, but you get to decide how it affects you," Rick explains. "Same with all this school and Jessica anxiety. Don't fight it, use it." Taking a deep breath, Morty approaches one of the floating test papers. Instead of avoiding it or trying to make it disappear, he examines it closely. "This is just paper," he says quietly. "Just symbols on paper." As he acknowledges this simple truth, the paper begins to fold itself into an intricate crane that takes flight, its wings now covered with equations that gradually solve themselves as it soars. Encouraged, Morty turns his attention to more manifestations of his anxiety. The gathering storm overhead, composed of all his academic worries, begins to change as Morty faces it directly. The mathematical symbols rearrange themselves into constellations, creating a cosmic chalkboard across the sky. The rain of test papers transforms into a shower of origami animals that populate the landscape with fragile but beautiful representations of his conquered fears. Even Jessica, or rather, the dream projection of her, changes when Morty finally stops pursuing her. When he acknowledges his feelings without letting them control his actions, her distant figure multiplies into dozens of reflections, each representing a different possibility rather than a single unattainable ideal. Some versions wave to him, others go about their own activities, all existing simultaneously without the pressure of romantic perfection. The landscape itself has become a living map of Morty's emotional journey. Calm, peaceful meadows flow into turbulent waters that eventually settle into reflective pools. Rock formations shaped by anxiety stand alongside delicate structures created through acceptance and understanding. The dream's stabilizing, Rick notes, watching as the interdimensional visitors cautiously resume their collaborative works. "You're learning faster than I expected." Morty notices that the creatures and beings around them have begun incorporating elements of his anxieties into their art, but transformed, rendered harmless or even beautiful through creative expression. A group of Gazorpians shapes clay into a school building that houses flowers instead of classrooms. The Meeseeks paint a portrait of Jessica that periodically shifts to show different faces, including Morty's own, suggesting identity and connection rather than romantic obsession. It's all still here, Morty observes, watching his anxieties exist in transformed states throughout the dreamscape. But it doesn't control everything anymore. Rick nods approvingly. That's basically what therapy would teach you, if it wasn't such a massive waste of time and money. Congratulations on the shortcut. Rick's dismissive comment about therapy fades away as something catches Morty's eye. A small metallic object nestled beneath a nearby dream tree, its surface pulsing with an electric blue light that doesn't match the natural illumination of their surroundings. The device appears almost purposefully placed, as if waiting to be discovered. Rick? What is this thing? Morty asks, kneeling down to examine the object. As his fingers brush against its surface, the device projects a holographic display showing complex data streams and what appears to be a miniature map of the dreamscape they've been exploring. Rick freezes momentarily, his usual quick response delayed by what seems like genuine consideration. Well, Morty, I guess the therapy session's over. Might as well come clean now. He sighs, reaching into his lab coat and pulling out a small remote. With a click, dozens of similar devices throughout the dreamscape activate simultaneously, their blue lights creating a constellation-like network across the landscape. You've been running an experiment this whole time, haven't you? Morty says, his voice calm but tinged with disappointment. The surrounding dream environment darkens slightly, reflecting his emotional state despite his attempts to maintain composure. Not just an experiment, Morty, a breakthrough. Rick's eyes light up with unusual sincerity. These sensors are mapping your subconscious in real time, creating the first comprehensive interdimensional consciousness map ever developed. He gestures broadly, and the air between them transforms into a three-dimensional representation of neural pathways glowing with data streams flowing between different sections. So what was all that stuff about helping me deal with my anxieties? Just a convenient cover story? Morty asks, watching as the dreamscape around them begins to shift, colors becoming more muted as his trust wavers. That part was real too, Rick admits, his voice lacking its usual sarcastic edge. Dreams operate on frameworks similar to interdimensional pathways. The same principles that let us hop between dimensions can be applied to navigate subconscious states. I'm killing two birds with one stone here, helping you while advancing science. As Rick speaks, the dream landscape begins responding to their conversation. The ground beneath them becomes transparent, revealing layers of mental activity represented as colorful strata of Earth. Mountains in the distance reshape themselves into brain-like formations with neural pathways connecting them. This whole time I thought we were just, I don't know, having a nice moment or something, Morty says, watching as memories from their adventures rise like bubbles through the transparent ground, each one contained within a perfect sphere. We were having a nice moment, Morty, Rick responds, his dream avatar's face showing uncommon vulnerability. But science doesn't take breaks, even in dreams. The devices are creating a map of how your mind processes interdimensional experiences. Do you have any idea how valuable that is? Your brain has been exposed to more dimensional variations than almost any other human consciousness. Rick waves his hand, and the holographic display expands to show a web of connections between different memories and emotional responses. See this cluster here? That's your adaptability matrix. The neural patterns that let you adjust to new dimensional rules almost instantly. Most humans would go insane after the third dimensional hop, but your mind has developed unique pathways. Morty looks at the display with growing interest, his initial feeling of betrayal gradually giving way to curiosity. So, all those exercises with transforming my anxieties? We're serving double duty, Rick completes the thought. They taught you valuable coping mechanisms while showing me how your consciousness processes and adapts to interdimensional chaos. It's actually pretty impressive, Morty. The rare compliment causes flowers to bloom spontaneously around Morty's feet, the dream responding to his emotional uplift. But why not just tell me what you were doing, he asks. Because unknowingly, processing your emotions produces different results than conscious efforts. I needed authentic responses, Rick explains, walking over to one of the devices and adjusting something. Plus, would you have agreed to let me map your entire subconscious if I'd asked permission up front? Probably not, Morty admits. Exactly. Sometimes science requires a little deception, Rick says, but then adds something unexpected. But I should have been more upfront with you. Your mind deserves that respect. This admission causes the dreamscape to shift dramatically, the colors becoming warmer and more vibrant as trust is partially restored. For the first time, Morty notices subtle differences between this dream version of Rick and the grandfather he knows in waking life. This Rick's posture is less guarded, his expressions more readable, as if the dream state has stripped away some of his defensive layers. So what happens with all this data once we wake up? Morty asks, gesturing to the network of devices. It gets compiled into the first interdimensional consciousness map, Rick explains, his voice filled with uncharacteristic excitement. Think of it as a navigation system for the multiverse that accounts for how consciousness itself responds to dimensional shifts. Future adventures could be calibrated to minimize psychological trauma while maximizing our ability to adapt. As Rick speaks, the dreamscape forms a visual representation of his explanation. A multi-dimensional atlas where pathways glow with different colors representing emotional responses and adaptive capabilities. Mountains reshape themselves into brain structures, while rivers of thought flow between them. I've been studying how your mind processes dimensional anomalies since our first adventure, Rick continues, his dream avatar seemingly more willing to share than his waking counterpart. Your brain has developed unprecedented adaptive capabilities. Understanding how your neural pathways have rewired themselves could revolutionize interdimensional travel. Morty watches as his own memories form interactive displays around them. Moments of panic from early adventures transform into later instances of calm problem-solving in similar situations. So I'm basically a lab rat with a really cool maze. More like the first human to develop natural immunity to a new disease, Rick counters. Your mind has antibodies against interdimensional chaos. That's worth studying, Morty. The scientific earnestness in Rick's voice strikes Morty as something he rarely hears in waking life. This dream version seems genuinely interested in teaching him, not just using him as an assistant or test subject. I guess that makes sense, Morty says finally. Just maybe next time tell me before you start wiring my dreams with sensors? Rick nods, and the gesture causes ripples through the dreamscape like stones dropped in still water. Fair enough. Partners should be transparent with each other. The word partners hangs in the air, manifesting as glowing text that slowly dissolves into the atmosphere. It's not a term the waking Rick would use so casually, revealing perhaps the most significant difference between Dream Rick and reality. That gentle moment of partnership dissolves faster than anyone could anticipate when the first alarm sounds. A high-pitched whine emanating from one of Rick's sensors that causes nearby dream trees to wilt instantly. The harmonious gathering of interdimensional beings scatters in confusion as the ground beneath them develops hairline fractures, pulsing with sickly yellow light. "Oh, that's not good," Rick mutters, checking a reading on his wrist device. "We've hit critical resonance between the consciousness map nodes. The dream matrix is destabilizing." Morty watches in horror as the once pristine landscape begins to deteriorate. The mountains in the distance, which had stood as majestic sentinels throughout their adventure, now contort into jagged formations resembling teeth in a massive jaw. The peaceful lake that had reflected perfect skies now bubbles with thick, tar-like substance that emits a faint screaming sound when the bubbles pop. "Rick, what's happening?" Morty asks, his voice tight with panic as the dream visitors flee in all directions, some dissolving into mist as they run. "I thought you said the experiment was stable." "It was stable. But dreams have thresholds, Morty," Rick explains, frantically adjusting settings on 3 different devices simultaneously. "Like any complex system, push it too far, and it reaches a tipping point. All my devices are now acting as destabilization nodes instead of mapping points." The sky above them splits open like torn fabric, revealing glimpses of other dimensions beyond. Not the peaceful, artistic interpretations they'd encountered before, but raw, unfiltered realities too complex for a human mind to process. Geometric shapes impossible in 3 dimensions rotate through each other, causing physical pain just to look at them. Morty struggles to concentrate, reaching out with his mind to restore the dreamscape's original elements. He manages to briefly stabilize a small area around them, creating a patch of normal grass and a single healthy tree, but the effort is immense. I can't hold it, Rick. Everything's falling apart. The dream versions of his family, who had been idealized reflections throughout their journey, now flicker like damaged holographic projections. As Summer tends to her garden, her form occasionally glitches to reveal a darker version with hollow eyes and vines growing through her skin. Dream. Jerry's encouraging smile flashes to a twisted grimace as the squirrels around him grow additional limbs and begin painting apocalyptic scenes. Dream Beth's healing hands momentarily transform into surgical tools dripping with unknown substances before Morty's concentration pulls them back to normal. The dream is collapsing into nightmare territory, Rick shouts over the increasing chaos. Your subconscious fears are bleeding through as my experiment destabilizes the boundary between your different mental states. Around them, the painting techniques that had created this world begin to fail spectacularly. Colors run like watercolors in rain, trees melt into puddles of pigment, and the sky itself seems to be peeling away in large flakes. The beautiful prismatic bridge Morty had created earlier now twists into a Mobius strip of broken glass that cuts through the landscape. We're seeing dimensional bleed-through, Rick explains, ducking as a flock of birds with too many wings and glowing red eyes swoops overhead. My devices were creating controlled tears in the dream fabric to map consciousness pathways, but now, those tears are widening uncontrollably. Morty gasps as fragments of their past adventures begin materializing around them. Not as the artistic representations he'd created to process his anxiety, but as vivid, dangerous recreations. A Cronenberg creature bubbles up from the ground nearby, while the screams of Gazorpazorp warriors echo from the fracturing forest. A portion of the collapsing dreamscape transforms into the citadel of Rick's during its destruction, complete with the sounds of panic and chaos. Rick, shut it down, Morty pleads, watching as the last stable portions of his original peaceful dream world shrink around them. Turn off your devices. I'm trying. Rick frantically works to deactivate his network of sensors. But they're in a feedback loop now. Each one is amplifying the instability of the others. It's like trying to stop a nuclear reaction after it's gone critical. The Dream Physics Laboratory, once a place of creative wonder, now resembles the aftermath of a dimensional collapse. The objects Morty had created float in broken pieces, occasionally reassembling into nightmarish new forms before shattering again. The equations that had hung beautifully in the air now burn with cold fire, searing incomprehensible formulas into the fragmented reality around them. Maybe we should just wake up, Morty suggests desperately, flinching as a nearby tree transforms into a writhing mass of tentacles. Get out before it gets worse. Bad idea, Rick shakes his head grimly. Waking during catastrophic dream collapse can cause permanent psychic damage. The shock of transition while your mind is in this state could leave lasting trauma. We need to stabilize things first. A massive rift tears open in the center of what was once their peaceful valley, revealing a swirling vortex of pure interdimensional chaos. Raw, unfiltered reality too complex for comprehension. The mathematical precision of Rick's experiment has transformed into something primal and dangerous, threatening to consume the entire dreamscape. Morty stares into the abyss, recognizing elements from their worst adventures swirling within it. Fragments of the Purge, echoes of Fruppyland's horrors, glimpses of the Cronenberg dimension they abandoned. His greatest fears and traumatic memories are being pulled forth by the collapse, threatening to transform his dream sanctuary into a prison of his own making. Rick, everything we've created is being destroyed, Morty whispers, watching as the last remnants of the Bob Ross-inspired world fade away. The gentle animals that had first welcomed him now stalk the edges of their shrinking safe zone, transformed into predatory versions with too many eyes and impossible anatomies. Not just destroyed, Morty, Rick says gravely, still working frantically on his devices. It's being rewritten. Dreams don't just disappear, they transform. And right now, yours is transforming into exactly the kind of chaotic, interdimensional nightmare you created this peaceful place to escape from. The dream versions of Morty's family have now completely destabilized, cycling rapidly between their idealized forms and twisted reflections of Morty's deepest fears about them. Dream Rick himself seems more stable than the others, but even he flickers occasionally to reveal a more monstrous version ranting about the futility of existence. As the safe zone continues to shrink around them, Morty watches the beautiful interdimensional art gallery they'd created collapse into a maelstrom of broken realities. The visitors who had contributed such beauty now flee in terror or transform into threatening versions of themselves. Even the Meeseeks have changed, their cheerful blue forms darkening to midnight as they continue painting, now creating images that seem to tear into reality itself. We need a new approach, Morty realizes, looking at the chaos surrounding them. Fighting against this isn't working. In that moment of desperation, a strange memory surfaces in Morty's mind. Something Bob Ross once said about there being no mistakes in art, only happy accidents. The realization hits him like a splash of cold water as he stares at the dimensional rift tearing apart his dreamscape. What if instead of fighting against the chaos, he could somehow work with it? "Rick, I think I've been doing this all wrong," Morty says, his voice steadying despite the nightmare elements swirling around them. "We keep trying to push back against the changes, but what if that's making it worse?" Rick raises an eyebrow, clutching a device that's frantically blinking red. "What are you suggesting? Let the dream collapse completely? Because that's where we're headed in about 3 minutes." Morty takes a deep breath and reaches toward the nearest melting tree. Instead of trying to restore it to its original form, he dips his fingers into the liquid pigment and begins to draw with it on the air itself. The colors respond instantly, forming new patterns that incorporate the distorted elements rather than fighting against them. "Look at what happens when I don't resist," Morty explains, as the liquid tree colors form an abstract swirl that stabilizes rather than continues melting. It's like what Bob Ross always said about happy accidents. We need to stop seeing these changes as mistakes we have to fix. The technique seems to work. Areas where Morty applies this approach stop deteriorating and instead transform into something new. The chaos doesn't disappear, but it no longer threatens to consume everything. Instead, the nightmare elements become contrast points that actually enhance the dreamscape's beauty in unexpected ways. "That's actually working," Rick admits, watching as Morty approaches a group of twisted Meeseeks. Instead of trying to restore their cheerful blue, Morty acknowledges their midnight shade and suggests they incorporate that darkness into their mural. The Meeseeks respond enthusiastically, using their new shadowy appearance to create depth and perspective in their painting that wasn't possible before. "Existence is pain, but art transforms pain into meaning," one declares, its voice deeper but no longer distressed. Morty moves through the dreamscape with growing confidence, applying this new philosophy to each distortion he encounters. When he finds a patch where the sky has torn open to reveal chaotic interdimensional space, he doesn't try to close it. Instead, he frames it with dream matter that transforms the rift into a dramatic cosmic window, making it appear intentional rather than catastrophic. "I get it now," Morty explains to Rick as they work. "It's like quantum superposition but for emotions and creativity. When we accept all possible states instead of forcing just one, the dream finds its own equilibrium." Rick watches with undisguised amazement as Morty intuitively develops techniques that blend scientific principles with artistic intuition. "You're creating adaptive boundary conditions," Rick observes, his scientific mind recognizing what Morty is doing instinctively. "Setting parameters without dictating specific outcomes." The interdimensional visitors, sensing the shift in approach, begin contributing to the stabilization. The crystalline beings align themselves along fracture points in reality, their translucent bodies refracting the chaotic energies into harmonious patterns. The dream Gromflamites, still in butterfly form but now with darkly iridescent wings, begin pollinating nightmare flowers, transforming their toxic emissions into something strangely beautiful. "They understand what we're doing," Morty says, watching as visitors from across the multiverse adapt to his new approach. They've probably seen dreams collapse before. A particularly violent section of the dreamscape continues to resist stabilization, a swirling vortex where Morty's deepest anxieties have manifested as a storm of twisted memories. Instead of avoiding it, Morty walks directly into its center. Inside, he finds fragments of his worst adventures swirling around him like debris in a tornado. "These are part of me too," Morty acknowledges, speaking directly to his fears. "I don't need to erase you. You belong here just as much as the peaceful parts." As he accepts each fragment, it stops spinning violently and instead finds a place in the new structure of the dream, often transforming into something that retains its essence but loses its destructive nature. A Cronenberg creature becomes a fascinating study in biological diversity rather than a horror. Rick observes this transformation with growing interest and begins applying Morty's techniques to his own devices. Instead of trying to shut them down or reset them, he reconfigures them to channel the destabilizing energies they've been emitting. "Hand me that nightmare pigment," Rick calls to Morty, pointing at a puddle of what was once a pleasant forest scene but has become a dark, writhing mass. When Morty brings it over, Rick applies it to his central device, which immediately stops blinking red and instead pulses with a deep purple glow. "I'm recalibrating my equipment to function as harmonic resonators instead of mapping nodes," Rick explains, his fingers dancing across holographic controls. "They'll amplify and distribute your stabilization patterns throughout the dreamscape." For perhaps the first time in their adventures, Morty finds himself guiding Rick rather than following him. "Try focusing on integration rather than isolation," Morty suggests, showing Rick how to paint with pure dream energy. The boundary between order and chaos isn't a wall, it's more like a permeable membrane. Rick awkwardly attempts to apply Morty's technique, his scientific precision initially working against him. "Loosen up," Morty coaches. "You're thinking too much about the exact molecular composition. In dreams, intention matters more than precision." Gradually, Rick adapts to this new approach, his movements becoming more fluid and intuitive. The devices he modifies begin emitting harmonizing waves that spread throughout the dreamscape, reinforcing Morty's stabilization efforts. Together, they move through the dream world, transforming chaos into creativity rather than trying to eliminate it. The landscape that emerges is unlike anything either of them expected, neither the purely peaceful Bob Ross world they started with, nor the nightmare it threatened to become, but something entirely new. Mountains still form impossible geometries, but now they do so with a sense of artistic purpose rather than random distortion. The sky still contains tiers showing other dimensions, but these now function as windows offering fascinating glimpses rather than threatening rifts. The dream versions of family members stabilize into forms that acknowledge both their ideal aspects and their flaws, making them more complex but also more authentic. As the last elements settle into their new forms, Rick and Morty find themselves standing at the edge of something neither science nor art could create alone. A world where impossible physics and artistic vision have merged into something entirely new. What happens when you allow chaos and order to dance rather than fight? The answer unfolds in landscapes that shouldn't exist, but somehow feel more real than reality itself. "Whoa," Morty whispers, his voice carrying across the newly stabilized dreamscape. Before them stretches a vista that defies explanation yet invites exploration. A series of floating islands hovering at different elevations, each one a perfect Bob Ross landscape in miniature. But instead of falling into the void below, they're connected by bridges made of glowing mathematical equations, numbers and symbols flowing like water between the landmasses. These aren't just any equations, though. They're Rick's formulas, now transformed from theoretical concepts into physical structures that support the weight of this impossible world. The devices that once threatened to tear the dream apart now pulse with gentle light, embedded in tree trunks and rock formations like natural growths. What once disrupted now harmonizes. Rick and Morty begin walking across one of these equation bridges, the symbols shifting slightly beneath their feet to accommodate their weight. "You know what's completely insane about this, Morty?" Rick asks, his tone unusually reflective. "This shouldn't work at all. By every scientific principle I know, this kind of dimensional stability should be impossible. Yet here we are. Below them, the void isn't empty but filled with upside-down oceans that somehow don't spill. The water's surface tension maintaining perfect cohesion despite being inverted. Fish with prismatic scales swim in geometric patterns, occasionally leaping upward, or what would be downward in normal physics, to splash back into their ceiling-like sea. As they reach the next island, they find a forest where the trees grow not from soil but from clouds. Each cloud puffs gently as it produces new branches and leaves, the biology of plant life merging seamlessly with meteorological phenomena. Birds with wings made of mathematical expressions nest in these trees, their songs manifesting as visible notes that float through the air before dissolving into tiny sparkles of light. This is what happens when we stop fighting each other's instincts, Morty observes, reaching out to touch a leaf that changes color in response to his emotions rather than seasons. Your science and my art were never really enemies. In the distance, mountains fold and unfold like origami, maintaining perfect balance despite constantly changing shape. They don't look unstable or threatening. Instead, they move with a grace that suggests this is exactly how mountains should behave in a world where physics has room for beauty. The family members they encountered earlier have found their places in this new reality. Summer sits atop a floating rock formation, her garden now growing in 3 dimensions as flowers bloom in midair around her. She's no longer just tending to plants, but conducting them like an orchestra, each blossom opening and closing in harmonic patterns. "Hey guys," she calls out, completely at ease in this impossible environment. The flowers started talking to me. Not like creepy talking, they're teaching me their languages from different dimensions. Nearby, Jerry stands in a clearing where his squirrels have evolved into collaborative artists. They're no longer just painting on canvases, but creating 3-dimensional sculptures out of light and shadow, manipulating the very fabric of the dream to express concepts that have no names in human language. Jerry looks genuinely confident. As he works alongside them, his dream self finding purpose in this creative community. The interesting thing about quantum aesthetics, Jerry explains with surprising authority, is that beauty exists in superposition until observed. These little guys understood that before I did. Beth's medical garden has transformed into a self-sustaining ecosystem where healing and growth happen simultaneously at all levels. The trees she tends now function as interdimensional way stations, their branches extending into spaces that shouldn't connect but do. Beth moves between them with the confidence of someone who understands the underlying structure of reality. Every living thing is connected across all dimensions, Beth tells them as they pass through her sanctuary. The same patterns repeat at every scale. It's actually very logical once you see it. Rick watches these idealized versions of Morty's family with an expression that suggests he's seeing something valuable in their simplicity. "You know what's weird, Morty? In this form, they actually make sense to me. The dream has expanded far beyond its original boundaries. Where once there was just a peaceful landscape, there now exists a pocket dimension that operates on principles drawn equally from science and imagination. Interdimensional visitors continue to arrive, but now they come not as curious explorers but as willing participants in this ongoing creation. A group of crystalline beings constructs elaborate structures that capture and refract both light and emotion, creating experiences that can be felt but not described. Meeseek's artists have evolved beyond their original programming, now creating works that exist in a state of perpetual becoming rather than completion. Their blue forms glow with purpose as they add new elements to the collective masterpiece. "We exist to create meaning," one Meeseeks declares joyfully, no longer bound by the pain of existence but liberated by creative purpose. Rick and Morty climb to a vantage point on a floating island that offers a panoramic view of everything they've helped create. Below them, the entire dreamscape pulses with harmonious energy, not static, but not chaotic either. It exists in perfect balance between change and stability, science and art, reality and imagination. "You've created something I couldn't have predicted, Morty," Rick admits, his scientific instruments now hanging forgotten at his side. "This is beyond interdimensional science. I don't know what to call it." "Maybe we don't need to call it anything," Morty suggests. "Maybe it just is." They sit together on the edge of the floating island, watching as colors that don't exist in waking life paint themselves across the sky. Mathematical equations bloom like flowers, while artistic brushstrokes form themselves into perfect geometric patterns. The boundary between disciplines has dissolved entirely, leaving only pure creation. In this moment of shared appreciation, Rick doesn't reach for his flask. Morty doesn't worry about school or Jessica or surviving their next adventure. They simply exist in a space between worlds that they've created together. A grandfather and grandson finding common ground in the most unlikely of places. "The multiverse is full of incredible things, Morty," Rick says quietly. "But I've never seen anything quite like this." Mountains still form impossible geometries, but now they do so with a sense of artistic purpose rather than random distortion. The sky still contains tiers showing other dimensions, but these now function as windows offering fascinating glimpses rather than threatening rifts. The dream versions of family members stabilize into forms that acknowledge both their ideal aspects and their flaws, making them more complex but also more authentic. While the dream world thrives in its newfound balance, Rick's scanner begins emitting a soft but insistent beep, the unmistakable signal that Morty's brain is preparing to wake up. Even in this place where impossible physics became reality, some natural laws can't be broken, and the transition between sleep and consciousness remains the one boundary even Rick Sanchez can't permanently cross. "Ah, geez, what's that sound?" Morty asks, looking up from a floating island where he's been teaching a group of crystalline beings how to create emotional harmonics. Rick glances at a small device on his wrist that displays Morty's brainwave patterns. "That, Morty, is your circadian rhythm asserting itself. The dream state is reaching its natural conclusion. We've got maybe 15 minutes before your consciousness pulls you back to that garage stool." The news brings a wave of melancholy over Morty as he looks around at this beautiful world they've created together. "Do we have to leave? Can't we just stay here?" Dreams aren't meant to be permanent, Morty. The mind needs to process and reset. Rick begins tapping commands into his wrist device. Besides, if we don't end this experiment properly before natural wake-up occurs, the cognitive dissonance could cause some pretty nasty side effects. Think interdimensional jet lag, but for your brain. Around them, the vibrant landscape seems to sense the coming transition. The colors remain beautiful, but take on a softer quality, like watercolors being gently diluted. The mathematical bridges connecting the floating islands begin to pulse with slower, more rhythmic patterns. "We need to safely deactivate all the nodes I placed throughout the dreamscape," Rick explains, projecting a holographic map showing dozens of blinking points scattered across their surreal world. Each one needs to be shut down sequentially to prevent any dream material from bleeding into your waking consciousness. Together, they begin the process, traveling through this world one last time. At each location, Rick carefully deactivates his devices while Morty works to return that section of the dream to something closer to its original state. The complex equations floating in midair simplify. The impossible geometries of the mountains gently fold back into more natural forms, and the upside-down oceans gradually right themselves. As they work, Morty finds himself saying goodbye to the dream versions of his family. He approaches Summer, who's conducting her garden of communicative flowers. "I have to go now," he tells her. Dream Summer looks up with a knowing smile. "Nothing ever really ends, Morty." Consciousness just shifts from one form to another. She hands him a single flower that slowly dissolves into particles of light that dance around his fingertips before fading away. Jerry and his collaborative squirrel artists are next. As Rick disables a nearby device, the sculptures they're creating begin to simplify. The boundaries between imagination and reality are just arbitrary distinctions we create, Dream Jerry says with uncharacteristic wisdom. Remember that when you're feeling limited by what seems possible. Each goodbye carries a strange weight. These aren't his real family members, yet they represent something meaningful about how Morty perceives them and himself. The interdimensional visitors also seem to sense the impending end. The Meeseeks finish their final painting before bowing and dissolving into blue mist. The Gromflemite butterflies perform an elaborate aerial dance before disappearing into the increasingly translucent foliage. Every species they encountered throughout the dream journey offers some form of farewell ritual. "They're not really saying goodbye," Rick explains as he transfers data from his equipment to a small crystalline sphere. "They're just returning to potential state, existing as possibilities rather than manifestations." "Will I remember any of this when I wake up?" Morty asks, watching as another section of the dream fades into a softer, more indistinct version of itself. "Most dreams fade within minutes of waking," Rick says, holding up the crystal sphere that now pulses with multicolored light. "But I've recorded everything in this dream matter storage device. It preserves quantum emotional states along with the data. When we wake up, I'll have everything we discovered here." As they reach the final node, positioned where they first entered the dream, Morty looks out at what remains of their creation. The landscape has nearly returned to the peaceful Bob Ross painting it began as, though subtle traces of their journey remain. A faint mathematical pattern in the cloud formations, a tree that still grows at a slightly impossible angle, flowers that shimmer with just a hint of interdimensional light. You know, I think I've learned something today, Morty says. It's not about controlling everything or fighting against chaos. It's about finding balance, accepting what can't be changed, and transforming what can be. Rick nods, a rare moment of sincere agreement passing between them. That's actually not bad, Morty. The multiverse operates on similar principles. Reality isn't fixed. It responds to observation and interaction, just like your dream did. The emotional algorithms here aren't so different from the quantum uncertainties we navigate out there. The light continues to soften around them, the dream space gently contracting as Morty's consciousness prepares to return to his physical body. Rick deactivates the final node, and the remaining structure of the dream begins to dissolve in earnest. Dreams exist in the space between who we are and who we could be, Rick says, his voice becoming distant as the dream fades. Remember what that feels like when you're awake? In the last moments before consciousness, Rick and Morty stand together on a small patch of green grass beside a gentle stream, the last remnants of the dream world. The boundaries between them and it grow increasingly transparent until there's no clear distinction between dreamer and dream. "See you on the other side, Morty," Rick says as everything dissolves into light. Then comes the transition, not jarring, but gentle, like rising through water toward a distant surface. Morty's awareness shifts, sensations of the physical world gradually returning. The hardness of the garage stool beneath him, the smell of motor oil and chemicals, the sound of Rick's voice, no longer within the dream but beside him in reality. Morty opens his eyes to find himself back in the garage workshop. Rick stands next to him, removing small sensors from both their temples. On the workbench between them sits the crystal sphere, pulsing with the same multicolored light Morty remembers from the dream. "Welcome back to the land of the conscious," Rick says, his usual gruff tone returning, though something in his eyes suggests the experience affected him too. Morty blinks, adjusting to being awake. Unlike normal dreams that slip away instantly, fragments of their shared experience remain vivid in his mind, enough to remember the feeling of balance they created, the worlds they built together, and the lessons he learned about control and chaos. Rick places the crystal sphere in a small containment field. "Got some interesting data. Your brain's processing of interdimensional stimuli is unusual, potentially useful for future adventures." A knowing look passes between them, an understanding that transcends the need for further explanation. Something significant happened in that shared dream space, something that changed how they see each other and the multiverse around them. I think what's really interesting about this journey through Morty's dreamscape is how it shows us that finding peace isn't about eliminating chaos completely. It's about learning to work with it, transform it, integrate it into something beautiful. We've watched Morty discover that his anxieties don't need to be fought against or suppressed. They can become part of a balanced reality when approached with creativity and acceptance. The true relaxation doesn't come from escaping adventure entirely, but from finding harmony within it. As your own consciousness drifts toward sleep tonight, remember that even your most troubling thoughts might become something extraordinary with a little dream physics and some happy little interdimensional trees.